the day when world became red. The clearing was a whirl of color and motion. A flash of yellow, a streak of crimson, and two smaller blurs of orange and blue. Minato Namikaze, the fourth Hokage, moved with a grace that seemed to defy the laws of physics, a glowing Rinnegan in hand as he guided his son. Beside him, Kushina Uzumaki was a hurricane of flowing red hair, her chakra chains erupting from her back to gently corral her daughter. Again, Minma. Faster. Minato called out, his voice a bright, encouraging shout. Focus your chakra. You're still relying too much on the Ninetales cloak. Mito, keep your chain straight. Kushina chirped, her tone warm and playful. Remember what I told you. They're not just for power. They're an extension of your love. From a high branch of a tree, far removed from the dust and energy of the training ground, a small, 11-year-old blonde boy watched. He was so still he might have been part of the foliage itself. The sounds of his family were a distant hum, a melody he wasn't part of. His hair was the same as his father's, but his eyes were a different matter. A shade of startling red, with three tomos swirling around a deep black pupil. His heart didn't ache with jealousy, not exactly. He loved his siblings. He knew they were special. Everyone in the village knew. Mito and Minma were the heroes of the leaf, the ones who held the Kyuubi at bay. His parents spent every waking moment of their free time training them, shaping them into the powerful shinobi they were destined to be. Naruto understood the necessity of it, the logic. Still, logic couldn't stop the quiet sting of being an afterthought. A brief pause in the training allowed Minato to glance in his direction. He offered a quick, distracted smile and a wave. Naruto, staying out of trouble? It wasn't a question that expected an answer. It was a fond dismissal, a quick check-in before he turned his full attention back to Minma, who was now stumbling through a complicated jutsu. Naruto didn't wave back. He didn't move at all. He just observed, his crimson eyes soaking in every detail. He was learning more than his siblings were, in a way. He was learning on his own terms. His Sharingan was his silent partner, his secret teacher. It was a lonely kind of power, and he was a lonely kind of boy. The weight of his loneliness was a constant presence, not a shout, but a low thrumming hum, like the distant pulse of his mother's chakra chains. #flashback. Naruto, currently 6 years old, sat in the dim hallway of his home, knees pulled to his chest, listening. He wasn't supposed to be out of bed, but the sounds from the living room had been too loud to ignore. Laughter. The warm, vibrant laughter of his parents and his siblings. He peered around the corner, just enough to see them. Minato was holding Minma aloft, a triumphant grin on his face. You did it. You held the chakra cloak for a full 3 seconds, son. That's a new record. I told you he could do it, darling. Kushina's voice was filled with pride. She was braiding a ribbon into Mito's hair, her own face soft and beaming. My little Jinchuriki are so strong. Naruto watched as his father set Minma down and his mother pulled both twins into a tight hug. It wasn't a family moment meant to exclude him, but it did all the same. He had tried to get their attention earlier, to show them a new trick he'd learned, but they'd just smiled, preoccupied, and told him they would watch later. Later never came. A feeling that had become a familiar companion settled over him. It wasn't a sudden, sharp pain, but a dull, hollow ache. It was the feeling of being in a house full of people, but utterly alone. He wasn't angry at them. How could he be? They were the hero's parents, and the heroes themselves. They had a sacred duty. But what did that make him? He lowered his head, a single, silent tear tracing a path down his cheek. In that moment, the world felt like it was shrinking, the light dimming, the sounds of laughter growing faint. That's when it happened. The tear hit the wooden floorboards, and as he looked down, the grain seemed to sharpen with impossible clarity. The faint chakra residue left by his father's last movements stood out like vibrant green lines. He looked up again, his head snapping toward the living room. The blur of motion from his parents and siblings became a slow, methodical dance. He could see every subtle shift of Minato's weight, every strand of chakra clinging to Kushina's hand. It was too much. The world was too clear, too sharp. He staggered back, stumbling to a small mirror hung on the wall. He stared at his reflection, but it wasn't his reflection anymore. His normal blue eyes were gone. Instead, two red irises, like droplets of blood, swirled with three small, Kama-like shape surrounded dark pupil. His body trembled, not with fear, but with a profound and bone-deep confusion. He didn't know what this was, but he knew why it had come. It had come because he was alone. It was a visual representation of his solitude, a secret born of his quiet heartbreak. He instinctively rubbed his eyes, and when he looked again, the red was gone, replaced by the familiar blue. The world was fuzzy and indistinct once more. He quickly got back to his room and lay on his bed, pretending to be asleep. But he wasn't. He was just a small boy with a big, new secret. A secret that felt less like a gift and more like a scar. It was a secret born of loneliness, and he knew, with a certainty that only a child's heart can hold, that it was a secret he must never, ever share. He was a ghost in his own home. He spent the days after the awakening of his eyes moving silently, a shadow passing through the sunlit rooms. While his parents were focused on the grueling, chakra-intensive training of their other children, Naruto's education had begun in a different way. He knew what he had to do. He went to the family library, a room filled with scrolls and books his parents had collected over the years. It was a place he was rarely in, as his siblings were the ones being taught history and shinobi theory. He wasn't looking for advanced jutsu. He was just searching for a clue. His 6-year-old fingers, still small and a little clumsy, pulled out a thick book on the great shinobi clans. He flipped through the pages until he found a section on the Uchiha. There it was, a small, crudely drawn illustration of an eye with a single tomo. The text underneath spoke of a Kekkei Jinkai, a bloodline limit known as the Sharingan, the copy wheel eye. It mentioned its ability to see chakra, track movements, and, most importantly, copy jutsu. He read the words, his heart pounding in his chest. A clan-exclusive bloodline. The implication was a heavy weight on his small shoulders. Why did he have it? Was he one of them? A different feeling, even more profound than his loneliness, crept into his mind. Fear. What if his parents found out? Would they see him as a stranger, an interloper? He was already so far removed from them. This felt like an unbridgeable chasm. He didn't understand the complex history of the clans, but he understood the word secret. This was his. His training began that very day, in the same way he had been learning since he could walk, by himself. He couldn't go to the public training grounds, not with his parents and siblings often using them. Instead, he found a small, neglected clearing far from the main road, hidden by thick trees. He took a few books from the library, simple, entry-level scrolls that showed basic academy jutsu and taijutsu forms. He would activate his Sharingan, feeling the familiar, quiet hum of power behind his eyes, and watch the diagrams on the page. Where another child might see a static drawing, Naruto saw a guide. He would practice a basic punch repeatedly, using his eyes to correct the angle of his arm and the position of his feet until it matched the illustration perfectly. He learned a rudimentary jinjutsu by simply watching a faint drawing of chakra flow and then mimicking the sensation inside his body. He never managed to hold the jutsu, but the feeling of learning something, of mastering a skill entirely on his own, was a rush of pride he had never experienced before. He also found a new way to interact with his family, albeit from afar. He would sit in a hidden spot and watch Minato and Kushina train Mito and Minma. His Sharingan would track their every movement, analyzing the flow of chakra, the subtle hand seals, and the footwork. He wasn't just watching. He was learning. He was silently, meticulously, and desperately catching up. He was a 6-year-old child, but he had the work ethic of a shinobi twice his age. His motivation was simple, yet heartbreaking. He wasn't training to become the Hokage. He wasn't training to get stronger than his siblings. He was training with the hope that one day, he would be strong enough for his parents to finally turn around and see him, a boy with bright blonde hair and, for a little while, eyes as red as a setting sun. The years passed like the turning of a page. Naruto grew, but his silent, solitary existence remained the same. His training continued in secret, a constant hum of effort and quiet desperation. He had mastered the tree climbing and water walking exercises with a terrifying efficiency, his Sharingan allowing him to instinctively correct even the slightest deviation in chakra flow. He had copied dozens of basic taijutsu forms from discarded scrolls and academy training sessions, his movements becoming precise and deadly. But he was still alone. Then, one day, his solitude was interrupted. He was deep in his hidden training ground, practicing a series of taijutsu blocks he had seen in a book. He was focused, his Sharingan active, tracing the invisible lines of his own movements. He didn't hear a twig snap or a leaf rustle. He simply felt a presence, and his eyes instantly flickered to the top of a distant tree. A figure stood there, draped in the dark, high-collared jacket of the Uchiha clan. He was a boy, no more than a few years older than himself, with short, messy black hair and an oddly serene expression. Naruto's Sharingan gave him a brief burst of data, a flicker of powerful chakra, unnaturally fast speed. The boy was Shisui Uchiha, the clan prodigy, and he was looking directly at Naruto's red eyes. Naruto's blood ran cold. He couldn't hide them fast enough. He deactivated his Sharingan, his heart hammering in his chest, ready to bolt. Shisui, however, simply smiled, a genuine, warm curve of his lips. He vanished from the treetop in a gust of wind, only to reappear a moment later, standing calmly in the clearing. He made no sudden moves, his hands resting easily at his sides. "I have to say," Shisui began, his voice calm and melodic, "I've been watching you for a while. You're a very good student, but you're a terrible ghost." Naruto froze, unsure how to respond. His secret was out. All his years of quiet effort, all his loneliness and determination had been exposed. He braced for a lecture, for a report to his father, for the end of everything he had built for himself. But Shisui simply sat on the ground. "Your parents are busy people," he said, not with malice, but with a simple understanding that made Naruto's chest ache. "I know. It must be hard." Naruto's eyes widened. This stranger saw him. Not the Hokage's son, not the hero's brother, but just him. "You're an Uzumaki. Why do you have the Sharingan?" Shisui asked, his tone not of demand, but of quiet curiosity. Naruto hesitated, but the vulnerability in Shisui's eyes was disarming. I don't know," he confessed, his voice barely a whisper. "It just appeared, when I was really sad." Shisui nodded slowly, a faraway look in his eyes. "That's how it is for us. We awaken it through profound pain. And if there's one thing I know about you, Naruto, it's that you carry a lot of pain." He reached out a hand. "I won't tell anyone. It's our secret. But you can't keep training on your own." Naruto looked at the outstretched hand, his small body trembling. The world had always felt so cold and so vast. But in this one moment, with this stranger, he felt a spark of hope. Shisui became the older brother he never had. Their training sessions were a world apart from Naruto's solitary efforts. Shisui would teach him the subtleties of chakra control, how to use the Sharingan not just to see, but to think. He taught Naruto the body flicker technique, explaining the delicate dance of chakra and movement that allowed him to move at speeds beyond the human eye. Naruto, with his Sharingan, learned it in a matter of weeks, his body and mind working in perfect, focused synergy. Shisui also taught him how to use his eyes as a defense against illusions and as a tool for prediction, analyzing an opponent's every subtle twitch and shift. The training was hard, brutal, and often pushed Naruto to his limits. But it was also filled with a warmth he had never known. For the first time, someone was teaching him, guiding him, and believing in him. He was still alone in his family, a secret that no one would ever know. But now, when he activated his Sharingan and saw the world in perfect, analytical detail, he didn't feel the sting of loneliness. He felt the quiet, powerful confidence that came from knowing he had a purpose, a friend, and a master who saw him for exactly who he was. A year had passed, and the boy who had once longed for attention had been replaced by a quiet, detached young man. The loneliness had not broken Naruto. It had forged him into something hard and unyielding. His voice was a calm murmur, his face a placid mask. He moved through his home as if he were a visitor, an observer, and his family, in their endless preoccupation, had become too accustomed to his silent presence to even notice. Naruto entered the kitchen, his footsteps making no sound on the tile. His father, Minato, was quickly grabbing a snack before heading back to the Hokage's office, papers already clutched in his hand. Minato smiled, a warm but distant expression. "Ah, Naruto, how was your day? Everything going well?" Naruto didn't pause as he moved to the cupboards. "It was fine." Good, good," Minato replied, his attention already back on a document. He was halfway out the door when Naruto's voice stopped him. The seal on your chakra paper is flawed. It'll bleed in the rain. Minato froze. He looked at the paper, then back at Naruto, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. He quickly adjusted the seal, a new wave of respect for his son's observation skills washing over him. Right. Thanks, Naruto. I'll see you later. He didn't notice the way Naruto's face remained blank, or the fact that he was already gone, having returned to the silence of his room. Exhausted siblings Minma stumbled into the house, his clothes torn and his body covered in bruises. He threw his bag to the floor with a groan, collapsing onto the couch. Dad and Mom are training us to exhaustion. I think I'm going to pass out. Mito, her hair still wet from a quick shower, sat next to him. Tell me about it. We can't even get the new jutsu right. They both looked at Naruto, who was calmly reading a book, his back to them. Naruto, Minma sighed, you're so lucky. You don't have to deal with all this. It's so much pressure. Naruto simply turned a page. Yes, Mito shot Minma a look that said, he's in one of his moods. They were too tired to try and engage him further, so they simply fell into a weary silence, assuming his quietness was just a quirk, a part of who he was. Kakashi was visiting the house for a rare, quiet dinner. The silence was thick and palpable. He watched as Naruto sat at the table, eating meticulously, but completely separate from the family's conversation. Finally, Kakashi broke the quiet. He grabbed Naruto's arm, pulling him away from the table. Naruto, we need to talk. He led Naruto to the porch, his voice low and concerned. Naruto, I know things are hard, but you can't be like this. They're trying their best. Your parents are the Hokage and the hero who sealed the Nine Tails. The village depends on them. You have to be more understanding. Naruto calmly pulled his arm away. I understand everything, Kakashi-sensei. I understand why they do what they do. I understand that Mito and Minma are more important. You don't need to explain it to me. It's not about being more important, Kakashi started, but Naruto's cold, calm tone cut him off. I'm not angry, he said, and the truth of it was more chilling than any rage could have been. I'm not sad. I'm not anything. It is what it is. Kakashi stared at him, speechless. This wasn't the lonely child he expected to see. It was a person who had already given up on being seen. He had no response to this quiet, profound detachment. The next day, Kakashi found Naruto at a secluded training ground, one he had never seen the boy use before. He was practicing a complex series of hand-to-hand combat forms, his movements fluid and precise. Kakashi's lone eye widened slightly, impressed by the flawless technique. This wasn't something you learned from an academy scroll. He recognized the speed and economy of motion. It was the mark of a prodigy. Naruto, still and silent as ever, continued his training without acknowledging him. He didn't even turn his head. Kakashi walked over and sat on the ground a few feet away, leaning back against a tree. He didn't offer a word of praise or criticism. He simply watched. For nearly an hour, the only sounds were the soft thud of Naruto's feet on the grass and the rustle of leaves in the wind. Finally, when Naruto finished his routine, he stopped and looked at Kakashi, his expression unreadable. I won't tell them, Kakashi said, his voice quiet, devoid of the patronizing tone from the night before. About your abilities. I can see you've been working hard. You're very good. Naruto's eyes remained blank, but his body language was wary. He crossed his arms over his chest, a silent question in his posture. Kakashi pulled out a small kunai and began tossing it from hand to hand. You know, when I was a kid, my father was a hero. The white fang of Konoha. But he was misunderstood. And when he died, everyone shunned me. Naruto's gaze flickered. This wasn't what he expected. I was alone. Completely alone, Kakashi continued, his voice soft, almost a confession. I had friends, teammates, but they couldn't understand. I had to learn to rely only on myself. To shut everything out to protect myself from the pain. He finally looked at Naruto, his gaze direct and empathetic. The difference is, you have a family, and you're still alone. Naruto didn't say anything, but the wall he had built, a wall of calm detachment, seemed to crack, just for a moment. He looked down, and Kakashi saw a flicker of the lonely child from years ago in his eyes. They're not bad people, Naruto, Kakashi said. They're just oblivious. But that doesn't make your pain any less real. I can see it. You don't have to carry it by yourself. You don't have to tell me anything, but I can be here, even if it's just to sit in silence. Naruto looked up at him, a flicker of raw vulnerability in his eyes. He had no words. He didn't know how to respond to this unexpected kindness. No one had ever offered him a hand without an agenda. He simply turned and walked back to his training. But this time, he didn't put as much distance between them. The message was clear. He hadn't accepted the offer, not fully, but he hadn't rejected it either. Kakashi sat there for a long time, watching the boy train in silence. For the first time, he felt he had reached a small part of the boy, and in his own heart, he felt a new kind of duty to protect this lonely child from the very people who were supposed to protect him. The silence was a palpable thing, heavy with the weight of the secret they now shared. Kakashi stared at Naruto's Sharingan, his mind racing to process the impossible sight. After a long moment, Naruto deactivated his eyes, the red giving way to the familiar blue. Shursui said my Sharingan is special, Naruto said, his voice quiet. He said it has more power than it should, especially in Jinjutsu. Kakashi's shock turned to a profound, contemplative silence. Shursui's words were not to be taken lightly. Shursui was the genius of the Uchiha clan, a master of illusion so powerful he was known as Shursui of the body flicker. For him to make such a statement about a child's Sharingan. He's right, Kakashi said, his voice barely above a whisper. The Sharingan's power isn't just in the eyes themselves. It's amplified by the wielder's chakra. The Uchiha had powerful chakra, but it was specialized. Your Uzumaki chakra, is something else entirely. It's vast. It's an ocean. He looked at Naruto, a sense of awe mixed with a deep, bone-deep sorrow. The power in your eyes is being fed by a limitless well. Your Jinjutsu won't just be effective. It could be absolute. And the physical strain that cripples other Uchiha when they overuse their eyes. You might not have to worry about it. Naruto's brow furrowed, a rare display of emotion. Is that a good thing? Kakashi sighed. Power isn't good or bad, Naruto. It just is. This makes you a weapon far more dangerous than anyone in this village can comprehend. You're a walking contradiction, a perfect fusion of two of the most powerful bloodlines in history. He placed a firm hand on Naruto's shoulder. This isn't just about training anymore. This is about control. The power in your eyes is fueled by emotion. You awakened it with your loneliness. If you let yourself become too angry, too resentful, it could twist you. That's a different kind of burden, one that no Uchiha has ever had to carry. Naruto just nodded, taking in the information calmly. He was a boy, but in this moment, he was also a soldier being briefed on a mission of vital importance. So, Kakashi concluded, his voice low and firm, our training just changed. No one can ever know about this. Not your father, not your mother, not even me, in public. We will become ghosts. Because if anyone finds out what you are, you will become a target. He looked at the boy he was supposed to be a big brother to, but who now felt like a kindred spirit, a reflection of his own burdened existence. Naruto had been born with the weight of the world on his shoulders, but now, he carried the power to shape it. And Kakashi, for the first time in his life, had found a mission that was truly his own, to protect the boy who had a secret more dangerous than any beast. #flashback and ##. Without a sound, he slid from the branch and dropped lightly to the ground, his movements so effortless they were almost a whisper. He turned and headed for the house, the noise of his family's training fading behind him. He was just about to enter the back door when two figures fell in step behind him. Naruto, wait up, Minma called, a faint look of exhaustion on his face. Mito, her expression a mix of concern and fatigue, caught up to him. Hey, we were just talking. We feel bad that we don't get to train together. We were thinking, maybe we could all train together tomorrow? You could get some pointers from us. Their faces were genuine, their offer sincere. It wasn't pity, not exactly, but an attempt to close a chasm they couldn't even see the full depth of. Naruto paused, his hand on the doorknob. He turned his head and gave them a small, polite smile, a gesture so practiced it had become as natural as breathing. Thank you, but that won't be necessary. Mito and Minma looked at each other, confused. But, we're good, you know. We've learned a lot. Minma offered, his pride showing through his weariness. We could teach you some stuff. I know you have, Naruto said calmly. And I appreciate the offer. He paused, his tone softening just slightly, a gesture to acknowledge their good intentions. But I have my own training. I'm training with Shursui. The statement hung in the air, a final, polite rejection. Their jaws dropped. Mito's eyes widened. The Shursui? The Uchiha prodigy? But why? Naruto gave them a small shrug, a silent answer that he wouldn't explain. He opened the door and stepped inside, leaving them on the porch, staring after him. Their guilt had been replaced by a new, more complicated feeling, confusion. They couldn't understand why he would choose a stranger over his own family. And Naruto, walking toward his room, felt a familiar and satisfying calm. He no longer felt the need to prove anything to them. He had his own path. He had his own teacher. He had his own secret. And in the quiet solitude of his own world, that was more than enough. The afternoon light filtered through the windows of the Namakazumaki home, falling upon a table where Minato and Kushina were reviewing scrolls, discussing Minma and Mito's progress. They were beaming with pride. Their chakra control is getting so much better, Minato said, a smile on his face. And Mito's chains are almost as strong as yours were at her age. Kushina preened, a playful grin on her face. Almost. But they're so dedicated, both of them. It makes all the hard work worth it. Just then, Minma and Mito walked into the room, their faces etched with a confused concern. The parents looked up, their warm expressions shifting to one of mild curiosity. Mom, Dad, we wanted to ask you something, Mito started, her voice uncharacteristically serious. Yeah, Minma added. About Naruto. Minato and Kushina's smiles faltered slightly. They hadn't thought about Naruto in a while. He had been so quiet lately, a near-invisible presence in the house. What about him? Kushina asked, her voice a little too cheerful. Is he doing all right? Minma shifted uncomfortably. Well, he's fine, but we tried to get him to train with us. We felt bad he's always on his own. Minato nodded. That's very kind of you, son. But Naruto is a very independent boy. He said he's already training, Mito interjected, cutting straight to the point. With Shursui Uchiha. The words hung in the air like a genjutsu, shocking the two adults into silence. Minato's pen dropped from his hand, clattering against the table. Kushina's eyes widened, a flicker of genuine bewilderment in them. With Shursui? Kushina repeated, her voice a whisper. That's not possible. Why not? Minma asked, genuinely confused. He said it himself. Minato stood up, his face serious. Naruto is only 11. Shursui is one of the clan's top operatives. He's been incredibly busy with Umbu missions lately. There's no way he has time to mentor a genin, let alone a boy who hasn't even started at the academy. Mito and Minma exchanged a look. But why would he lie? Mito pressed. He looked so calm about it, like it was just a normal thing. The question hung in the air, a cold, sobering reality for the two parents. Minato looked at Kushina, and for the first time in years, he saw a crack in her ever-present smile. They had been so consumed by their duty, by their chosen children, that they had not once considered what their neglected son had been doing. They had simply assumed he was fine. I'll talk to him, Minato said, his voice laced with a confusion that was rapidly turning to a deep-seated guilt. But even as he said the words, he knew. He knew Naruto wouldn't lie. He knew there was something about their youngest son that they had completely missed. And the silence in the room suddenly felt less like peace and more like a void. Later at dinner, the Namakazumaki dinner table was a picture of a perfect family. Minato and Kushina sat at either end, a warm sense of love and contentment radiating from them. Mito and Minma chattered about their day's training, their voices full of youthful energy. A place was set, but it remained empty. Without a sound, Naruto entered the room. He moved like a whisper carried on the wind, his presence so subtle that no one even noticed him at first. He walked to his seat and settled into it, a ghost at his own family's dinner table. It was only when Kushina went to serve him that she noticed he was already there. Oh, Naruto, I didn't even see you come in, she said, her voice a little too loud in the sudden silence. Minato cleared his throat, his expression thoughtful. He had been thinking about Mito and Minma's words all day. The doubt had been gnawing at him, a tiny, uncomfortable sliver of reality in his otherwise perfect life. Naruto, Minato began, his voice surprisingly formal. Minma and Mito told us you've been training with Shursui. Is that true? The question was simple, but it hit Naruto with the force of a full-body blow. He froze, his hand halfway to a bowl of rice. A sudden, Jarring feeling of surprise crashed through his calm, detached facade. He had truly believed they didn't care, that his life outside of this house was invisible to them. The question was not an accusation. It was the simple, genuine interest of a parent, and it caught him completely off guard. He finally looked up, his blue eyes showing a flicker of raw emotion. Minato seemed to sense the boy's shock. He tried to soften his tone. "Son, we're just a little surprised. Shursui is a very busy shinobi. I wasn't aware you were in contact with him." Naruto's eyes held his father's gaze, and the flicker of surprise hardened into a quiet, cold resolve. After a moment, he responded, his voice even and calm. "He found me. He saw that I was teaching myself and offered to help." Kushina leaned forward, her face a mask of confusion. "Why would he do that? He's a prodigy. He must have a reason." "He said that I was a prodigy too," Naruto replied, the words hanging in the air. The unspoken question was clear. Why didn't you see it? The atmosphere in the room shifted. It became heavy with unspoken words. The perfect family dinner was over. In its place was a tense silence, a chasm opening up between them. Naruto watched their confused, hurt expressions, and a part of him, the part that had been so starved for recognition, finally snapped. He would show them. He would show them what their neglect had created. He met his father's gaze, the deep blue of his eyes changing, a vibrant, terrifying crimson. A single tomo appeared in each eye, then a second, and finally, a third. The swirling, three-pronged Sharingan pulsed with a dark, mature energy. Mito and Minma gasped, their faces going pale. Minato stared at the impossible sight, his mind racing. An 11-year-old child with a fully mature, three-tomo Sharingan. It was a feat beyond imagination, a power that even the greatest Uchiha prodigies took years longer to achieve. The Sharingan was the result of a profound emotional shock, and an 11-year-old with a fully awakened one. Kushina's hand flew to her mouth, tears welling in her eyes as she looked at her youngest son. The answer to every question she and Minato had ever had. His quiet solitude, his unbelievable independence, his calm, distant nature, was staring them in the face, a terrifying, beautiful, and heartbreaking secret that had been born of their own failures. Kushina's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes welling with tears as she stared at her son. Minato was frozen, his mouth slightly agape, unable to process the sight of the impossible power pulsing in his youngest child's eyes. Mito and Minma were speechless, their faces pale with shock. The laughter and casual conversation of a moment ago had vanished, replaced by a devastating silence. Naruto's eyes held the gaze of each family member, one by one. He saw their fear, their shock, their dawning comprehension. He saw the tears tracing a path down his mother's cheeks. He saw their horror, but he didn't feel any satisfaction. He simply felt nothing. This was the result of their absence, a powerful, cold truth he had lived with for years. "Why are you crying?" he asked, his voice calm, even, and devoid of any discernible emotion. The question hit Kushina like a physical blow. Her shoulders sagged as a sob escaped her lips. She didn't have an answer. How could she explain that her tears were for a lifetime of missed moments, for the son she had never truly seen? She was crying for the little boy who had been in pain, for the 11 years she had been so blind, and for the cold, emotionless young man he had become as a result. Minato stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He wanted to say something, anything, but the words died in his throat. He was the Hokage, the leader of a village, a man known for his calm under pressure. But in this moment, looking at his son's eyes, he felt a level of profound failure he had never experienced. Naruto simply watched them, his crimson eyes spinning slowly, waiting for a response that would never come. He was a perfect shinobi, a testament to his own strength and resilience. And in his detached, quiet question, he had broken his perfect family. The tears streamed silently down Kushina's cheeks. Minato stood, frozen in place, as the full weight of their failure crashed down on him. The rest of the family stared, speechless. In the face of their devastation, Naruto felt nothing. He saw their reactions as an overreaction, a dramatic display he couldn't comprehend. "Don't get so worked up," Naruto said, his voice even and calm. He deactivated his Sharingan, his eyes returning to their normal blue. Shursui had his fully mature Sharingan at 10, so it's not a big deal. The words landed in the silence like a slap. It wasn't an act of cruelty, but a statement of simple, heartbreaking fact. He wasn't trying to comfort them. He was offering his own perspective, one shaped by his secluded training with a genius of the Uchiha clan. His benchmark for success wasn't the average shinobi, but a legendary prodigy. The casual dismissal of his own feat was more devastating than any angry outburst could have been. Kushina's tears turned to a silent, gut-wrenching sob. The idea that her son was so far removed from their world that he saw an 11-year-old with a fully awakened Sharingan as not a big deal was a truth too painful to bear. She was crying for the life she had given him and for the life she had ignored. Minato's eyes dropped from Naruto's face to his hands, which were clenched into tight fists. He was a man of logic and strategy, but there was no jutsu, no tactic, that could fix this. His son wasn't just a boy he had failed to notice. He was a stranger, a ghost in his own home. And now, he had the eyes of a ghost. The perfect silence of the dining room was broken only by Kushina's soft sobs. Minato stared at his son, his mind a whirlwind of guilt and regret. The cold, logical part of him was trying to comprehend the impossibility of the Sharingan, while the father in him was reeling from the quiet devastation in Naruto's eyes. Naruto simply watched his mother. The tears in her eyes were the one thing he couldn't completely block out. They were a reminder of how she had carried him in her womb for 9 months and endured unimaginable pain to give him a life. The tears she shed now felt like a betrayal of that struggle. He sighed, the sound not of anger, but of a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. The weight of his loneliness, his secret, and this sudden, painful confrontation was finally taking its toll. "I'm not mad at you," he said, his voice calm and tired. "If anything, I'm just tired." His words hung in the air, more devastating than any furious accusation. They were a simple statement of fact, a truth he had lived with for years. He wasn't a hero, wasn't a monster, wasn't anything but a boy who was utterly, completely, and profoundly exhausted. He looked at his mother, the tears still falling. His cold demeanor, the very thing he had perfected to survive, seemed to be the source of her pain. It was a contradiction he couldn't resolve. He was finally seen, but the seeing was breaking the one person he still held a quiet, unspoken respect for. And for the first time, Naruto wished he could just go back to being a ghost. Kushina's sobs racked her body. Minato was a statue of guilt and shame. The silent, devastating admission from Naruto that he was simply tired had shattered their world. He had given them his truth, a truth that was a direct result of their neglect, and it was more painful than any accusation could have been. Naruto looked at his mother, the tears still falling. His calm facade, the shield he had so meticulously built, began to crack. He had expected anger, fear, or confusion, but the tears were something he hadn't prepared for. He had hated seeing them in his mother's eyes ever since he could remember. Slowly, carefully, he rose from his seat. He walked around the table and knelt beside her chair. The action was so out of character that everyone at the table, Minato, Mito, and Minma, watched in stunned silence. Naruto reached out a hand, a small, uncharacteristic tremor running through it. He gently pulled his sleeve and, with an almost tender gesture, used it to wipe the tears from her cheeks. "Please don't cry," he whispered, his voice so quiet it was barely audible. It was the plea of a little boy, not the voice of the detached young man who had just revealed a forbidden power. Kushina's breath hitched. She looked at his face, at the blue eyes that, for a single moment, held a flicker of the love and innocence she had been so blind to. The dam of her composure broke completely, and she reached out, pulling him into a tight, desperate hug. She didn't have to say anything. Her silent embrace said it all. She was sorry. She was so sorry. And as Naruto felt his mother's arms around him for the first time in years, he didn't tense. He didn't push her away. He just stood there, letting the cold walls he had built around his heart begin to thaw in the warmth of a long-overdue embrace. The Sharingan, the secret training, the emotional distance, all of it faded for a single, precious moment. He was just a boy, and in his mother's arms, he was finally seen. Next day at Asedmi, the Konoha Academy was a cacophony of sound and energy, a stark contrast to the quiet of the Namikaze Uzumaki home. Genin hopefuls ran, shouted, and sparred, their youthful exuberance a vibrant display of life. But for Naruto, it was just another stage. He sat alone at the edge of the training field, a textbook on basic jutsu open on his lap, his expression placid and unreadable. He had already mastered all of it, and more. He was here because it was a requirement, not because he needed to be. He was an anomaly. His siblings, Mito and Minma, were the center of a swirling vortex of students and attention, their prowess on full display. They were the heroes, the prodigies, the children of the Hokage. But Naruto was a ghost, and the other students, accustomed to his silence, barely registered his presence. The only one who did was a boy with spiky brown hair and a perpetually bored expression. Shikamaru Nara, a lazy genius who found most of the world to be a troublesome chore, was sitting under a tree, staring at the clouds. He was the only person who seemed to understand Naruto's quietness. "Hey," Shikamaru said, his voice a low drone. Naruto didn't look up from his book. "Hey, your old man looked pretty spaced out today," Shikamaru observed, not with curiosity, but with a simple, detached observation. "Troublesome." Naruto closed his book, placing it on the ground beside him. He looked up at the clouds. "He's just figuring things out." Shikamaru gave a soft grunt of acknowledgement. He didn't ask what or why. He understood that some things were too complicated for simple words. He was a master of observation, seeing the patterns in people just as he saw them in the clouds. He saw Naruto not as the Hokage's neglected son, but as an island of calm in a sea of chaos. "Training later?" Naruto asked. "Sure. My place," Shikamaru replied, his voice still a low drawl. "My mom wants me to stop being a bum." "What a drag." Naruto gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. It was their ritual. Their training was a mix of strategy games and quiet, focused combat, an intellectual chess match played out with shuriken and kunai. It was a world they had built for themselves, a quiet refuge from the noise and expectations of the world outside. He looked back at the bustling training ground, at the animated forms of his siblings, and he felt a profound sense of peace. He had his own path, his own friends, and his own secrets. He wasn't the boy who desperately craved attention anymore. He was a different kind of ninja, a ghost who was silently learning how to wield his darkness, and he was okay with that. After Asedmi, he went to Shirsue's home. Naruto's heart was pounding, faster than it ever was, sounding too loud in the eerie silence of the surrounding. He was feeling too uneasy. Shirsue had been sick, but he said he's fine, a lie Naruto quickly detected. When he reached Shirsue's apartment, he didn't find any trace of Shirsue. His heart was pounding faster than before. It felt like it'll burst out. He must be busy with Umbu mission. The excuse sounded hollow to his own ears, and then he found a neatly folded letter and a scroll at Shirsue's bedroom. The scroll had a special seal that can only be opened by Naruto's blood, and that made it only worse. Shirsue wanted only Naruto to have this. And something inside Naruto said that he didn't want to know what's inside the letter, but still he went and read the letter. "Dear Naruto, by the time you find this letter, I'll be long gone. And I kinda suck at final words, 'cause they are final, you know? Got it? Well, back to topic. The truth is I have an incurable chakra illness, ever since I awoke my Mangekyo Sharingan. But don't worry, a part of me will always be with you. There are so many things I wanted to do, like becoming your Jonin sensei, embarrass you on your dates, and be there to help you, but I guess it won't be possible now. But hey, I'll be still watching you from above, and I want to see you become a shinobi greater me. But hey, my Jinjutsu is still better, and one more important thing, I have left my eyes in a scroll for you. And if you ever awaken your MS, transplant your eyes with mine to gain eternal Mangenkyo Sharingan. Good luck, lil bro." Naruto was crying, but there was no sound, just silent tears. His Sharingan spun faster and morphed into an 8-pointed shuriken as his eyes started to bleed, and he fell unconscious. Next day. Awakening in a new reality, the first thing Naruto registered was the sterile scent of antiseptic. The second was the soft, rhythmic beeping of a medical machine beside his bed. He opened his eyes, blinking against the harsh, white light of a hospital room. His head throbbed, and his entire body felt like it had been run over by a steamroller. A figure was standing at the foot of his bed, holding a clipboard. She had long, blonde hair tied back and a diamond-shaped marking on her forehead. It was Tsunade, the slug Sannin. Her expression was a mix of intense focus and a deep, weary concern. She was a professional shinobi, but her gaze held the wisdom of a woman who had seen and healed more trauma than anyone. She didn't react to his waking immediately. She simply jotted a final note on her clipboard before looking at him. "Your chakra pathways are in disarray," she said, her voice calm and clinical. "It's the kind of strain a body takes when it tries to hold a power it isn't ready for. I've also noted some severe mental trauma. Your mind is fighting to reconcile with something." Naruto's brow furrowed. He remembered the letter, the words, the silent, falling tears. He remembered a cold, hollow ache in his chest, and then a searing, blinding pain behind his eyes as his Sharingan evolved. He instinctively reached up, touching his eyes, which felt heavy and raw. How did I get here?" he asked, his voice a dry rasp. Tsunade set the clipboard down on a nearby counter. She folded her arms, her gaze never leaving his. "That would be your brother, Minma. He found you collapsed at an Uchiha apartment. He was frantic. He brought you here as fast as he could, and he hasn't left the waiting room since we started treating you." Naruto's placid mask slipped for a brief, shattering moment. Minma, the loud, boisterous, overachieving twin. The hero. He was the one who found him. The idea didn't fit into the simple, detached worldview he had meticulously built for himself. Minma was supposed to be preoccupied, too busy with his own life to notice a ghost. But he had. He had seen him, and he had saved him. The fact was more painful than the physical exhaustion. It was a new truth that forced its way through his carefully constructed walls. He was seen, not out of pity, but out of genuine, panicked concern. And he had his brother to thank for it. The hospital room was quiet, save for the soft beeping of the medical machine. Naruto lay in the bed, his face a placid mask of indifference as he spoke to Tsunade. He had just acted oblivious to her medical concerns, and her frustration was beginning to show. She knew his emotional distance wasn't a medical condition she could simply heal. It was a wound that had festered over years. "I need to make a call," Tsunade said, her voice firm. She left the room, her movements swift and purposeful. She found Minato pacing the hallway, Jiraiya sitting on a bench with a concerned expression, and Kushina holding the hands of Mito and Minma. "I can't get through to him," Tsunade stated bluntly. "He's putting up a wall so thick it's impenetrable. He's suffering from immense mental and emotional trauma, but he refuses to acknowledge it. I need you all to go in there and talk to him." Jiraiya sighed, running a hand through his white hair. "My godson, always a handful." "He's not being a handful," Kushina said, her voice trembling. "He's hurting, and it's our fault." She looked at Minato, whose face was etched with a quiet, profound guilt. They had talked all night, and the reality of their neglect was a physical weight. Minato nodded. "Go in. I'll be in there in a minute." Kushina led the way, with Mito and Minma following her. Naruto looked up as they entered, his face still unreadable. Kushina rushed to his side and wrapped him in a hug, her body shaking with silent sobs. "Naruto, please, just talk to us," she whispered, her voice muffled by his shoulder. "Tell us what's wrong." Naruto remained still in her embrace, his hands limp at his sides. "Nothing is wrong," he said, his voice a quiet, calm monotone. "I'm just tired." Minma and Mito stood awkwardly at the foot of the bed. "We're worried about you," Minma said, his voice laced with genuine concern. "You fainted. We've never seen you do that." Naruto simply turned his head. "I just pushed myself too hard. It happens." Just then, Minato and Jiraiya walked in. Jiraiya gave a soft, knowing look to Minato before stepping forward. "Naruto, my boy," Jiraiya boomed, trying to break the tension. "You scared us all." "I was just telling Minato, you've got to stop trying to be the coolest shinobi. That's my job." Naruto offered a small, polite smile. "Yes, Master Jiraiya." Jiraiya's joke fell flat. Naruto's response was a formality, a sign of respect, but there was no warmth in it. The boy was a stranger. Minato finally walked over to the bed, the weight of the Hokage's burden and the even greater weight of a father's failure on his shoulders. He looked into his son's blue eyes he now knew held an even more profound secret. He was the only other person in the room who knew about Shirsue's death. He saw not just the emotional detachment, but the raw, unexpressed grief. He saw himself in his son, a man who had also lost everything and built a wall around his heart to survive. Naruto, Minato said, his voice low and serious, we are here. We're not going anywhere. We will wait for you to talk to us, however long it takes. Naruto's expression didn't change, but he met his father's gaze. In the silent understanding that passed between them, Minato knew his son was grieving for the boy who had been a brother to him. He was grieving alone, not out of choice, but out of necessity. And in his silent, sorrowful eyes, Minato knew that it would take more than just words to bring him back. It would take a miracle. Minato's voice, heavy with guilt and honesty, had ended on a silent plea. The family was a tableau of pain and regret, all eyes on the boy in the hospital bed. They had offered him love, understanding, and a promise to wait. But he had remained unresponsive, his emotional walls as high and unbreachable as ever. Then, slowly, Naruto turned his head. His eyes, clear and blue, settled on Minma. It was the first time he had truly looked at his brother since the conversation began. Thank you, Naruto said, his voice a low, even whisper. Minma's shoulders stiffened, caught completely off guard. He had been so worried, so frantic, that he hadn't thought about what to say once his brother was awake. He stammered for a moment before the simple truth came out. Don't mention it. You look like you were in trouble. You could have just left me, Naruto continued, his voice calm, but with an undercurrent of something that sounded like wonder. Nobody would have known. That's not what family does, Minma replied, his voice firm, a newfound maturity in his tone. He looked at his brother with no pity, only a quiet, resolute concern. The simple exchange was a flash of lightning in the tense silence of the room. It was not a grand act of forgiveness or an emotional outburst, but a quiet, profound moment of connection. Minato and Kushina watched, tears welling in their eyes, as they saw a tiny crack form in the wall around their son's heart. It was a sign that the boy they had failed was not entirely gone. There was a path back, a glimmer of a way to mend the family that had been shattered by a secret born of their own neglect. The small, quiet act of gratitude hung in the air, a fragile truce in a war of silent pain. Minato and Kushina watched, a desperate hope flickering in their hearts. Minma's simple words about what family does seemed to resonate, a truth spoken in innocence. Then, Naruto turned his gaze from Minma to the rest of the family. His eyes, though clear and blue, were devoid of the warmth they craved. His voice was a quiet whisper that shattered the fragile moment. Family are we? He asked, the words holding no anger, only a profound, heartbreaking uncertainty. The question was a blade, sharp and precise. It cut through the silence and the unspoken apologies, forcing them all to confront the full scope of their failure. Minma's face fell. He had used the word without thought, but now, faced with his brother's quiet challenge, he had no answer. Kushina's breath hitched, the hope she had just felt turning into a fresh wave of tears. The question wasn't an accusation, but a simple fact. Naruto had survived for 11 years without them acting like a family. How could they claim the title now? Minato stood in the middle of the room, looking at his son. He was the Hokage, a leader who had made countless impossible decisions for his village. But this one question, from the boy who had once longed for his attention, left him utterly speechless. Next day the sun was beginning to set over Konoha, painting the sky in warm hues of orange and red. Mito and Naruto sat side by side on a bench in a quiet park, watching the light fade. It was an unspoken ritual they had started, a small part of her effort to bridge the chasm between them. For a long time, the only sound was the gentle rustling of leaves in the evening breeze. Mito finally broke the silence, her voice soft and hesitant. You know, when we were little, I always thought you were mad at us. Naruto didn't look at her. I wasn't. I know that now, she said, a sad smile on her face. But you're so quiet. It's like you're living in a different world. Naruto didn't respond immediately. He watched a single leaf detach from a branch and spiral to the ground. It's not a different world, he said, his voice a low, calm murmur. It's just quiet. Mito nodded, thinking. She was trying to find the words, to understand a feeling she couldn't articulate. Minma and I, we have so much energy. We have so much of the Nine-Tails chakra. We're always trying to control it, to keep it from running wild. She paused, looking at her brother. You're so calm. Is that something you had to learn? Naruto finally looked at her, his blue eyes holding a wisdom far beyond his years. He didn't answer with words. Instead, he simply activated his Sharingan. The tomo spun to life, and in that instant, Mito's mind filled with a surge of images, an empty training ground, a boy meticulously practicing, a single kunai spinning through the air in a perfect arc. The images were not of rage or anger, but of a profound and solitary determination. She gasped, but not in fear. She was simply stunned. He deactivated his eyes just as quickly, and the world returned to normal. "It's easier to stay calm," he said, his voice still low, "when you don't have anyone to show off for." Mito stared at him, tears welling in her eyes. He had just answered her question without a single word. He had not learned to be calm. He had been forced to. The quietness she had always admired was a shield forged in his loneliness. He had not been mad at them. He had simply been on his own all along. A single tear escaped, tracing a path down her cheek. Naruto watched it fall. This was new territory for him. His life had been one of quiet observation and strategic calculation. He knew how to predict a jutsu, how to analyze a fighting style, but he had no data on how to handle tears. His instinct was to stay quiet, but his new resolve, his clumsy effort to mend their relationship, pushed him to act. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, folded handkerchief. He held it out to her, his hand steady, his face an impassive mask. "Here," he said, his voice flat. "They make your eyes swell up." Mito took the handkerchief, a small, sad sob escaping her lips. He had done his best. His mind, so brilliant at breaking down complex shinobi techniques, was utterly lost when faced with a simple display of human emotion. He didn't know how to comfort her, only how to provide a logical solution to the physical problem of crying. Naruto, seeing that the handkerchief had not stopped the tears, tried a different approach. He cleared his throat. "There's no reason to be upset," he said, his voice still calm and rational. "I'm not mad at you. It's just a thing I have." His words, meant to be comforting, landed with the weight of cold, hard stone. They were true, but they missed the point entirely. She wasn't crying because he was mad. She was crying because she finally saw the profound loneliness that had shaped him. Mito didn't reply. She just sat there, clutching the handkerchief, her sobs now quiet, but no less painful. Naruto, defeated by this foreign, illogical thing called emotion, simply sat beside her. He didn't try to speak again. He didn't know what to say, but he didn't leave. He simply stayed, a silent, awkward presence, the only comfort he knew how to provide. Naruto watched his sister cry, the sight of her pain a foreign feeling he couldn't process. His clumsy words had failed. He sighed, abandoning his logical mind. Acting on a simple, raw instinct, he reached out and wrapped his arms around her, holding her in a quiet, uncertain hug. Time skipped 2 years. The Namikaze Uzumaki family dinner table was no longer a stage for unspoken regret. It was simply a table where a family ate. The silence was still present, but it was less suffocating, filled now with the quiet understanding of a long road ahead. Kushina placed a large bowl of ramen in front of Naruto. It wasn't the boisterous, loud affair she used to make, but a simple, heartfelt meal. She had spent the last 2 years learning his quiet tells, his subtle preferences, and the simple way he liked his food. "It's just the way you like it," she said, her voice soft. Naruto looked up from his bowl. He met her gaze for a moment, and his lips curved into the smallest, most private of smiles. "Thank you, Mom," he said, his voice a low, calm murmur. Kushina's breath hitched, and she squeezed her eyes shut, a single tear escaping. It was the first time he had called her that in years, and the simple word, spoken so quietly, meant more to her than any apology. Minma, who had been chatting with his father about a new training regimen, turned to Naruto. "Hey, you were there for our last session. You think you could have figured out that jutsu faster than me?" he asked, a hint of friendly competition in his voice. Naruto paused his meal. He didn't brag or boast. He simply answered, "It's a 2-stage jutsu. You were focusing on the chakra flow for the second part before the first part was complete. It's about a complete cycle, not 2 halves." Minma stared at him, his mouth slightly agape. He had spent hours on that jutsu, and Naruto had just broken it down in a single sentence. You were watching?" he asked, a mix of awe and surprise in his voice. Naruto gave a small, almost imperceptible shrug. and then went back to his ramen. The simple act of providing that insight, of engaging with his brother's world, was a testament to how far they had come. He was no longer a ghost in their lives. He was simply Naruto, quietly, slowly, and painstakingly finding his way back to them. The air in the academy classroom hummed with the electric energy of freshly graduated Chunin. Students buzzed with anticipation, their eyes darting around the room, hoping to be placed with their friends. Naruto, however, sat in the back, his posture calm and his face unreadable. He had his own reasons for hoping for a good team, a quiet willingness to try and make connections. Iruka Sensei, beaming with pride, stood at the front and began reading the team placements. The names blurred together for Naruto, a list of familiar faces and destined partnerships. Team 7, Sasuke Uchiha, Sakura Haruno, and Isamu Uchiha. Your sensei will be Itachi Uchiha. A few whispers of awe went through the room. Team 8, Hinata Hyuga, Kiba Inuzuka, and Shino Aburame. Your sensei is Kurenai Yuhi. Team 10, Ino Yamanaka, Shikamaru Nara, and Choji Akimichi. Your sensei is Asuma Saratobi. Naruto felt a small sense of relief. His only true friend would still be close by. Then came the announcement for his siblings. Team 11, Minma Namikaze Uzumaki, Mito Namikaze Uzumaki, and Yakumo Kurama. Your sensei will be Kakashi Hitaki. The cheers for the Hokage's children filled the room. Finally, only a few students remained, including Naruto. And finally, Team 12, Naruto Uzumaki, Kagami Uchiha, and Yuki. Iruka paused, his gaze softening as he looked at the last girl on the list. She was a pale, quiet girl with startling gray eyes, a foreign exchange student from the land of water. She was a survivor of a brutal bloodline purge, the sole member of a clan of ice release users. Your sensei will be here shortly. Dismissed. The room emptied in a rush of noise, leaving the three of them behind. Naruto, Yuki, and Kagami sat in silence, each an island in a sea of empty desks. Moments later, a man stepped into the room. He was tall, with long, dark hair and piercing golden eyes, but his expression was soft, almost grandfatherly. He offered a gentle smile that reached his eyes, a profound contrast to his reputation. "Hello," he said, his voice as smooth as silk. "I'm Orochimaru, and I'm your sensei." He walked to the front of the class, his gaze settling on each of them in turn. His eyes lingered on Yuki, but not with cold scientific curiosity. There was a deep, empathetic sadness in his gaze, a silent understanding of her past. He had also been a child alone in the world, and he saw a reflection of himself in her. "I have already heard a great deal about you," he said. Naruto Uzumaki, a boy with an incredible spirit. Kagami Uchiha, a gifted mind. And Yuki, a young woman with a beautiful, unique gift. His words made them feel not like new shinobi, but like children in the presence of a kind guardian. "You will meet me on Training Ground 3 later this afternoon," he said, his voice a calm and encouraging presence. "We will not be doing a test. We will simply be talking. I am here to help you not only become great shinobi, but to become a great team. I look forward to it." He gave them another warm smile before leaving the room, leaving behind a profound sense of quiet hope. The sun was a warm weight on Training Ground 3. The clearing, surrounded by a thick circle of trees, was silent save for the occasional bird song. Orochimaru stood at the center of the field, his smile gentle and reassuring. Naruto, Kagami, and Yuki sat on the grass in a small, tense triangle. "All right, let's begin," Orochimaru said, his voice as smooth as silk. "Before we test your skills, we must first learn to understand each other. This is the foundation of every great team. So, let's start with a simple question. What do you like, what do you dislike, and what is your dream?" He looked at Naruto, a quiet, knowing look in his golden eyes. "I don't have a particular liking for anything," Naruto said, his voice calm and even. "As for dislikes, I have many. But I particularly dislike unreasonable people and those who are too stupid to comprehend the greater picture." His words were delivered without a hint of emotion. "My dream is to leave the world slightly better than it already was." The statement was profound in its meaning. Those weren't the word of a child. No, those were the words of a person who has saw pain, felt pain, and learned to forgive. Orochimaru nodded, a deep, silent understanding passing between them. He then looked at Kagami, a girl whose pride was as visible as her Uchiha symbol. I like training and my little brother, Sasuke, Kagami said, her voice firm and clear. I dislike those who think their power makes them better than everyone else. My dream is to become a shinobi strong enough to protect my family, and to make the Uchiha clan known for something other than its pride. Orochimaru gave a small smile. A noble goal. His gaze then settled on the last member of the team. Yuki was a small, timid girl, her hands clasped in her lap. Her eyes were a stunning shade of gray, the color of a winter sky, and they darted nervously from Kagami to Naruto. It's all right, Yuki, Orochimaru said, his voice gentle. There are no wrong answers here. Yuki took a deep breath, her hands clenching into fists. I like sweet food, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I dislike people who hurt others, her eyes filled with a sad, distant memory. She paused, and her voice became a little stronger. And my dream is to find a family, one that won't leave me again. The air around them grew still, the silence now filled not with tension, but with a shared understanding. Each of them, in their own way, was searching for a place to belong. Orochimaru looked at his new team, 3 young shinobi who had all been given immense power, but had lost so much. He knew this would be his greatest challenge, but he also knew it would be his most important one. Orochimaru stood at the center of the training ground, 2 small silver bells glinting in the afternoon sun. He held them out, a gentle, knowing smile on his face. You have until sundown to take a bell from me, he said, his voice a low hum. The one who succeeds will pass. Those who fail will return to the academy. Ready, start. The moment the last word left his lips, a gust of wind carried a lone crow into the clearing. It had no sound, no presence, yet it drew Orochimaru's attention immediately. Its single, blood-red Sharingan spun, and in that instant, Orochimaru froze, his expression blank as he was locked in a powerful genjutsu. Before Kagami and Yuki could even register what was happening, Naruto was already in motion. His movements were a blur, a whisper of wind. He grabbed Yuki's arm and a handful of Kagami's jacket, and in a single, fluid motion, he flickered out of existence. They reappeared at the edge of the forest, the suddenness of the shift leaving Kagami and Yuki gasping for air. They stared at Naruto, a mixture of shock and confusion etched on their faces. The boy who was supposed to be a quiet, unremarkable ninja had just moved them with a high-level technique. What was that? Kagami whispered, her eyes wide. How? Naruto didn't answer. His expression was as placid as ever. He simply looked at Orochimaru, who was still locked in the crow's illusion. He's a Sannin. We need a plan. He's expecting us to attack him on unknown. He then looked at his teammates, his gaze calm and unwavering. Yuki, you'll go in first. Use your ice release to create a diversion and trap him. He'll be expecting a physical attack. Yuki, still shaken, nodded slowly. And you, Naruto? I'll follow up with my genjutsu. Naruto's eyes held no emotion, but his plan was cold and logical. It's not as powerful as the crow's, but it will disorient him long enough for Kagami to get in close. He looked at Kagami, a flicker of trust in his eyes. You're fast and precise. You'll take the bells. The objective is to work together. Kagami stared at him, stunned. He had already analyzed their strengths and had a flawless, foolproof plan. The quiet boy who sat in the back of the class was a tactical genius, a ghost who saw everything, and he was counting on them to play their part. By the time Naruto finished explaining, Orochimaru has already broke free from the genjutsu, but just as he was back in the real world, Yuki's attack began. She unleashed a flurry of ice shuriken, their sharp edges glinting as they flew through the air. Orochimaru sidestepped them with an amused ease, but then Yuki stomped her foot, and a large wall of jagged ice erupted from the ground between them, forcing him to leap to the side. Not bad, Yuki-chan, he said, his voice light. He was holding back, his every movement a gentle feint, his speed reduced to that of a normal jonin. He was fighting to test them, not to defeat them. Just as he dodged the last shard of ice, a strange, low hum filled the air. Naruto, still hidden at the edge of the forest, had activated a genjutsu. The world around Orochimaru shifted, the colors blurring into a nauseating haze. It wasn't powerful enough to hold him for long, but it was a perfect distraction. Kagami, a blur of motion, sprinted in for the bells. She was fast, her hand a perfect blur of motion, but Orochimaru was faster. He simply raised his hand, and the bells clinked against his open palm. She had failed, but just as her face fell in defeat, another crow, this one completely unnoticeable, swooped down from the trees. It snatched a bell and flew to where Naruto was hidden. "My sincerest apologies, Kagamikan," Orochimaru said with a light smile. "I believe the bell belongs to your teammate." The test was over. The bell was in Naruto's hands, a quiet victory for a brilliant plan. Naruto dropped silently to the ground, the small silver bell clutched in his hand. The crow, its work done, vanished in a puff of smoke. He met his sensei's golden gaze, his face as placid as ever, even as his two teammates stared at him in silent awe. "So did we pass?" Naruto asked, his voice calm and direct. Orochimaru's smile widened, a hint of genuine pride in his eyes. "You didn't just pass," he said, his voice a low hum of approval. "You are the first team to ever truly grasp the meaning of this test. A shinobi's greatest weapon isn't their jutsu, but their ability to work together and think beyond the obvious." He looked from Kagami and Yuki, who were still processing the flawless execution of a plan they had no idea existed, to Naruto. "You understood that the true objective was not to take the bell, but to work as a team." Orochimaru nodded, his eyes lingering on the bell in Naruto's hand. "Yes, you passed. All three of you." Orochimaru gave them a final, warm smile. "You have all passed the test. Rest up. Your journey has just begun." With that, he vanished with a rustle of leaves, leaving the three young genin alone in the quiet clearing. The silence that followed was different now. It was no longer filled with the tension of a test, but with the awkwardness of newfound understanding. Yuki fidgeted, her hands clasped in front of her. She took a deep breath, her voice barely a whisper. Would you two, maybe, like to hang out? I could buy you some sweet food." She looked at them, her eyes full of the quiet fear of rejection. Naruto's face, so recently a mask of calm strategy, softened. He saw the genuine, timid hope in her eyes and recognized a loneliness that he had spent years trying to conceal. "Yeah," Naruto said, his voice surprisingly gentle and kind. "I'd like that. Thank you." Kagami stared at Naruto, a new kind of shock settling in. She had just seen him demonstrate tactical genius beyond her comprehension, and now, he was being kind. To her, Naruto had always been just a quiet kid, another face in the crowd. Seeing him offer comfort, without a moment of hesitation, was completely unexpected. She had seen him as an emotionless tactician, but this was a whole new side to him. "Yeah, of course," Kagami said, her voice a little flustered. "Let's go. I know a great dango place." The three of them walked toward the village, the last rays of sunlight casting long shadows behind them. They were no longer a team of strangers, but three individuals, all a little broken, who had just found a quiet, new reason to belong. The late afternoon sun cast long, lazy shadows across the streets of Konoha. Team 12, their first mission assigned but not yet started, decided to grab a bite to eat. They found a quiet ramen stand and settled in, the steam from their bowls a warm haze in the cool air. Yuki, clutching her bowl, took a small bite, her eyes wide with simple delight. "It's so sweet," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the clatter of bowls. "I've never had a village with so many sweet things." Kagami, a quiet strength in her posture, ate in silence for a moment before turning her piercing Uchiha gaze on Naruto. "Why?" she asked, her voice direct. Naruto didn't look up from his ramen. He knew what she was asking. It wasn't about the food. It was about him, about the paradox of his genius and his emotional distance. "Why were you like that?" Kagami clarified, her voice softening slightly. "In the academy, you were just a ghost. How could you see everything and know so much, but be so quiet?" Naruto took a sip of his broth, his expression calm. "It's easier to see the whole picture," he said, "when you're not in the middle of it. When you're a part of something, you lose your objectivity. When you're outside of it, you can see things others miss." He didn't say he had been outside of it for his entire life. He didn't have to. The quiet sadness in his eyes said it all. Kagami simply nodded, a new understanding settling over her. Naruto was not an emo kid. He was a strategist who had been given a cruel advantage, years of complete detachment. She looked at Yuki, who was now smiling to herself as she ate. It's good that you're here, with us, Yuki said quietly, her voice still timid but with a hint of newfound confidence. Naruto's lips curved into a small, almost imperceptible smile. Yes, he said. It is. Hashtag reports to the Hokage hashtag. The atmosphere in the Hokage's office was tense and professional. Minato sat behind his desk, his expression a mix of official authority and a deep, personal anxiety. Before him stood the Jonin sensei of the new Genin teams, ready to deliver their reports. First was Itachi Uchiha, his face as calm and expressionless as ever. Team 7 has passed, he stated, his voice even. Sasuke, Sakura, and Isamu demonstrated excellent teamwork. Their collaboration was efficient and effective. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Sasuke's rivalry with Naruto, while initially a distraction, was a powerful motivator. It is a tool that can be used. Kurenai Yuhi stepped forward next. Team 8 has also passed. Hinata, Kiba, and Shino worked together flawlessly. They used their sensory and tracking abilities to outsmart me. Their teamwork is intuitive and solid. Asuma Sarutobi took a long drag from his cigarette before speaking. Team 10 passed, though not without some encouragement. Choji, Ino, and Shikamaru are a handful, but they prove that the Ino-Shikacho formation is as effective as ever. They passed, reluctantly but surely, after Shikamaru figured out the trick. Then, Kakashi Hitaki, the Hokage's personal student, stepped forward. Team 11 passed, he said simply. Minma and Mito are exceptionally talented, and their control over the Nine-Tails chakra is remarkable. Yakumo Kurama's Jinjutsu abilities are already on a high level. However, he paused, his single eye taking on a serious expression. They relied too heavily on their individual strengths and need to learn to support each other without their inherent talents as a crutch. Minato nodded, his face solemn. He had expected as much. Finally, Orochimaru stepped forward. He stood before the Hokage with a gentle, reassuring smile that made Minato feel a deep sense of relief. Team 12 has also passed, Orochimaru said, his voice a low hum of approval. They are not like the others. They did not just learn the lesson, they perfected it. Naruto Uzumaki is a genius strategist, and he used every tool at his disposal, including a Jinjutsu of his own making, to coordinate his team. Yuki and Kagami trusted his leadership, and in doing so, they not only took a bell, but they proved their mettle as a team. Minato's heart swelled with a quiet pride he hadn't felt in years. He saw in Orochimaru's report the tangible result of his son's painful journey. He had been so worried, but hearing it from Orochimaru, a man who had navigated a similar darkness, made it real. I have already begun analyzing Yuki's unique bloodline, and Kagami is a brilliant mind, Orochimaru continued. But it is Naruto who is the true strategist. I believe his potential is even greater than we first thought. Minato offered a small, sincere smile. Thank you, Orochimaru, he said, his voice filled with gratitude. I'm glad you're here to guide them. Hashtag at family dinner hashtag. The day was a whirlwind of meetings and reports. Minato, tired from a long day in the Hokage's office, finally arrived home. As he stepped through the door, the sounds of his family filled the air. He found Kushina in the kitchen, her face a mask of loving pride as she listened to Minma and Mito's boisterous retelling of their bell test. And then Kakashi Sensei said he was so impressed with our teamwork. Minma boasted, his voice loud and full of youthful pride. He said we were the best team in the class. That's wonderful, my little man, Kushina said, beaming, her hands a blur as she chopped vegetables for dinner. I knew you would be brilliant. Mito nodded eagerly. Kakashi Sensei said we were a natural fit. We passed with flying colors. Minato smiled, a genuine sense of pride in his heart. He was happy for them. But as his gaze moved away from the kitchen, his smile faded. Naruto was in the living room, a quiet, solitary figure. He was sitting on the floor, staring out the window, his expression placid and unreadable. He wasn't being ignored, not intentionally. He was simply a presence that didn't demand attention. He was an easy part of the room to forget. The scene was a stark, brutal contrast to the one Minato had just heard in the office. Minma and Mito's so-called perfect teamwork was a lie built on their own youthful ignorance, and their celebration was loud and effortless. Naruto's victory, a true masterpiece of strategic genius and emotional control, was completely silent. Minato stood in the doorway, the weight of his son's separate realities crashing down on him. One was a part of the vibrant, loving family, and the other, the quiet genius, was still alone. The sight was a painful reminder of his own failure. The sounds of a happy, bustling family dinner filled the air, but as Minato stepped through the door, a sudden silence fell. He stood in the entryway, his hands clenched into fists at his sides, his expression a mix of weary disappointment and a profound sadness. "What's this I hear about you two having a perfect teamwork?" he asked, his voice calm, but with a razor-sharp edge. Minma and Mito's cheerful expressions froze. They looked at their father, their youthful pride still shining brightly. "Kakashi-sensei, I said so." Minma blurted out, a hint of defiance in his voice. "He said we passed with flying colors." "He said you passed," Minato corrected, his gaze unwavering. He looked from his children to the quiet figure of Naruto, sitting alone in the living room. "He said you passed despite your reliance on your own natural talent. He said your teamwork was lacking." Kushina, who had been listening from the kitchen, slowly turned, her hands still. She saw the truth in Minato's eyes. "You too," Minato continued, his voice heavy with a deep sadness, "have always had everything handed to you. You've always had each other, and you've always had me and your mother. But Naruto, he had to earn everything. And he earned a victory far more profound than either of you." He gestured to Naruto, his face a silent, broken testament to his own failure. "While you were relying on your natural talent, your brother was figuring out how to beat a Sannin in under an hour. He didn't brag about it. He didn't make a scene. He just did it." Minma and Mito stared at their father, their expressions a mix of hurt and dawning realization. The hollow victory they had so proudly claimed was exposed as a lie. They had passed, but their brother had won. And for the first time in their lives, they saw a shadow of the boy who had always sat so silently in their midst. The air in the room was thick with the weight of Minato's words. Minma and Mito stood in stunned silence, their youthful arrogance shattered by the brutal honesty of their father's assessment. But before they could speak, Kushina stepped forward, her hands clenched at her sides. Her face, usually a canvas of warmth and affection, was now a mask of protective fury. "That's enough, Minato," she said, her voice a low, dangerous rumble. "They are children. They are not you, and they are not him." Her gaze, filled with a desperate mother's love, moved from her husband to her twin children. "You cannot hold them to the same standard as Naruto. What did you expect from them? To be tactical geniuses who can beat a Sannin on their first day? They're not like that. They're emotional. They're excitable. They're still learning. Is it a crime to be proud of them for trying?" She didn't wait for an answer. She went to her children and pulled them into a fierce, protective hug, her body acting as a shield against Minato's cold truth. "You listen to me," she whispered to them, her voice cracking with emotion. "You two are the bravest, most amazing children in the world. You worked hard, and you passed. That's all that matters. Don't you dare let anyone, not even your father, take that away from you." Naruto watched the scene unfold from the living room, his quiet facade unchanged, but his mind a jumble of new and painful information. His mother, the person he had desperately longed to connect with, had just separated him from his siblings. She had put a clear, emotional line in the sand, and he was on the other side of it. He was not like them. He was something else. He was the quiet genius who had to earn everything, while his siblings were the brave children who were worth protecting from the truth. The argument faded into a heavy silence. Minato stood, his face a mix of pain and frustration. Kushina was still clutching Minma and Mito, her protective fury a silent, physical shield. The chasm between them had never felt wider. Naruto's calm facade, which had held so steadfastly through years of loneliness and days of emotional upheaval, suddenly felt heavy. All the small, difficult steps he had taken, the apology, the attempt at friendship, the quiet opening of his heart, felt like a useless, pointless effort. He felt the familiar, crushing weight of solitude settling over him once more, a ghost in a family that had no room for him. He was a creature of logic and order, and this was an unfixable chaos. Without a word, without a glance at his family, Naruto simply stood up. His movements were fluid, his body already in the process of fading into the silent, unnoticeable phantom he had been for years. He turned his back on the dinner table, on the family he had so desperately tried to connect with, and began to walk toward the front door. But luck was not on his side. Before he could take a second step, a warm hand gently, but firmly, closed around his arm. Naruto stopped, his mind already preparing to phase out of existence. But a quiet, desperate plea stopped him. Naruto, his father's voice, thick with a profound sadness, broke through the tension. Minato's eyes were filled with a raw, paternal sorrow. He had seen the quiet retreat, and he would not let his son vanish into the darkness. Not again. Naruto stood still for a moment, the weight of his father's hand on his arm a beacon of the connection he so desperately craved. But it was too late. His mother's words had been a final, crushing blow, and the fragile bridge he had been building to his family had been destroyed. He looked at the hand on his arm, and with a quiet, sorrowful gentleness, he gently brushed it off. His action was not one of defiance, but of weary, soul-crushing exhaustion. It was a silent admission that he had no more fight left. Before Minato could speak, Naruto's body flickered, disappearing without a single hand seal, a testament to his silent mastery. He was simply gone, leaving behind a profound, aching void. Minato stood frozen, his hands still suspended in the air. The emptiness where his son had been was a cold, brutal reality. He turned slowly, his eyes meeting Kushina's. There was no anger in his gaze, only a deep, heartbreaking sorrow. The look was a silent accusation, a question that hung in the air like smoke. Look at what you've done. Kushina's fierce, protective defiance crumbled. She saw the full weight of her husband's words, not as an insult, but as a painful truth. She had defended her two children, but in doing so, she had driven away the one who needed her most. The realization hit her like a physical blow, and her face, once filled with a mother's fury, was now a mask of pure, unadulterated devastation. The air was thick with a silence more deafening than any shouting. Minato stood, his hands still hovering in the air, a testament to the boy who had just vanished. His face was a mask of disappointment and sorrow. Kushina was no longer the fierce, protective mother. Her hands, which had so fiercely gripped her children, now hung limp at her sides. She stared at the empty space where Naruto had been, her eyes wide and filled with a raw, agonizing regret. "Minato," she whispered, her voice a small, broken sound. "What did I do? Why? Why did he leave?" Minato's gaze was not angry, but filled with a profound, weary sadness. He saw the pain in her eyes, and he knew it was a pain he couldn't take away. He sighed, a deep, tired sound that seemed to carry the weight of years of silent hurt. "He's been doing it for years, Kushina," he said, his voice quiet. "He's a ghost. He learned to become one because it was easier than facing the truth of his solitude." He looked at her, and she saw the sorrow in his eyes. "You didn't do anything wrong, my love. You were just a mother, protecting her children." He turned to Menma and Mito, their youthful defiance replaced by fear and confusion. "Your brother," he said, his voice heavy, "just chose a life of solitude over the possibility of pain. And in that moment, your mother's words gave him the final push he needed to walk away." The family stood there, a portrait of quiet devastation. The celebration had turned into a funeral, and the person they were mourning was a boy who was still alive, but had just silently chosen to disappear. The night was a silent, forgiving blanket. Naruto sat alone on the grass of the Team 12 training ground, his hands resting on his knees, his face turned toward the moon. He was not angry. He was simply tired. The argument, the hurt, the broken silence, it all felt so heavy, so exhausting. He thought of the years, the countless nights he had sat alone in his room, watching from his window as his family celebrated without him. The birthdays they had forgotten, the holidays they had not shared. He had been a ghost in his own home, and they were so caught up in their own lives, in their own easy affection, that they never even noticed he was missing. He thought of his achievements, his years of quiet, brutal training, his mastery of the body flicker without seals, his strategic genius, his ability to outwit a Sannin within an hour. He had done it all for himself, for the silent, burning desire to prove that he was real. But at dinner, it meant nothing. His victory was a hollow, silent thing that paled in comparison to the loud, empty triumph of his siblings. And most of all, he thought of the pain. The deep, aching pain of being unseen. He had finally, painfully, tried to show them who he was, to open up a crack in his armor, and in return, his mother had built a wall between them. She had chosen them. It wasn't about malice or neglect. It was simply a matter of a deep, unconscious habit. He was a puzzle she didn't know how to solve, so she simply went to the ones who were easy to love. Naruto closed his eyes, a single, silent tear escaping to trace a path down his cheek. He was alone, not in a physical sense, but in a way that was far more profound. And for the first time, the loneliness didn't feel like a punishment. It felt like a simple, undeniable truth. Hashtag with Naruto hashtag. A gentle hum of chakra was the first thing Naruto felt. He had felt the presence for a few moments, a quiet, hesitant signature moving toward him in the darkness. He knew who it was, and the recognition brought a new, quiet layer of calm to his weary mind. "You know I can feel you, right?" Naruto said, his voice a low, tired murmur that was barely a whisper in the silent night. A surprised voice came from the darkness. It was Yuki. "Really?" she asked, a note of awe in her tone. She slowly, cautiously, walked into the clearing, her form a pale silhouette in the moonlight. "Why are you here anyways? Isn't it too late?" Yuki sat beside him on the cold grass, her movements as quiet as a falling leaf. "I couldn't sleep," she said, her voice filled with a familiar, painful honesty. "It felt lonely. What about you?" "I just wanted to be somewhere, alone," Naruto said, his voice a low, tired murmur. Yuki's eyebrow raised, a flicker of confusion on her face. Her voice was as soft as a whisper. "But you're not alone now," she said, her eyes searching his face in the darkness. "Why did you want to be alone?" "It's easy," Naruto replied, his voice a low, tired murmur. Yuki's eyes widened, her expression filled with a raw, painful honesty. "But I'm alone, and it hurts," she countered, the words a quiet protest against his simple logic. Naruto's gaze softened. He looked at her, and for the first time, he saw a mirror of his own pain. He had always been so rational about his isolation, so clinical, but her words were a simple, undeniable truth. "I know," he said, his voice now a low whisper, filled with a sadness he rarely allowed himself to show. "It's easy to be alone. You just are. But it's hard to be invisible. To be in a room full of people and feel like you're not even there. That's what hurts." Yuki was silent for a long moment, her brow furrowed in confusion. The words invisible and unseen were foreign concepts to her. She had been exiled, hurt, and abandoned. Her pain was loud and brutal, a physical presence. "What do you mean, invisible?" she asked, her voice small and filled with a genuine bewilderment. "How can you be invisible?" Naruto took a deep, shuddering breath, the first truly emotional act he had allowed himself all night. The calm, logical walls he had built around his heart began to crumble in the face of her honest confusion. "You can be in a room with your family," he began, his voice a low, tired murmur, "and watch as they laugh and talk and celebrate without you. You can watch your parents praise your siblings for things you did better, but you just aren't there. They're not bad people. They're just too busy, too in love with their other children, to notice the one who's a ghost." He looked at her, his eyes filled with a profound, bone-weary sadness. "For a decade, I watched my life from a distance. I taught myself jutsu, I mastered my chakra, I trained in secret. I was a strategist, a master of 100 skills. And I did it all just so I could prove to myself that I was real. But even my greatest achievements were unseen by the people I needed to see me the most." His voice was devoid of anger, but filled with a crushing, emotional truth that was far more powerful. He was not a victim. He was a survivor who had mastered a new kind of silence. He was a child who had been a ghost in his own home. And for the first time in his life, he had told his story to a person who could understand. The last echo of Naruto's story faded into the quiet night. The air was thick with the weight of his words, a raw testament to a pain she had never expected to hear from him. Yuki stared at her hands, her mind replaying his words. She had been a refugee, but she had never been a ghost. She had been left behind, but not forgotten. And yet, she understood. The feeling of being different, of being seen as something strange and unsettling, was a language she knew all too well. I wasn't forgotten," she began, her voice a small, trembling whisper. People looked at me. They just looked at me differently. My Kekkei Genkai, my ice release, it was seen as a curse. My village, my family, they were scared of it. They were scared of me. Her voice became a small, sad hum, like the wind through the tall grass. When the fighting came, they just left me behind. They didn't do it out of anger. They did it out of fear. I was a child with a monster inside me, and they just wanted to get away from it. A tear slipped from her eye, a quiet, silvery line on her cheek. I was alone, and I thought I would die alone. But then, Orokimura Sensei found me. He didn't see a monster. He saw a frightened child. He took me in, and he brought me here. He gave me a home and helped me become a shinobi of the leaf. She looked at Naruto, her eyes filled with a new, quiet strength. He told me that my power wasn't a curse. It was a gift. And he taught me that I was a person, not just a weapon. He taught me to be seen. Naruto simply listened, his expression a quiet, empathetic mask. He understood. He had lived a life of invisibility, and she had lived a life of being seen for all the wrong reasons. In that quiet, secluded training ground, two lonely souls, each with a broken past, had finally found a home in each other's understanding. Naruto watched her, his expression a calm mask that hid a vulnerability she had never seen before. After a long, quiet moment, he spoke, his voice so soft it was almost lost to the night. "You wanted a family, didn't you?" he asked, a hint of hesitation in his tone. "Can I have a place in it?" Yuki's breath hitched. The words were simple, but they carried a weight she had never known. A deep blush crept up her cheeks, and her timid nature, her shyness, took over completely. The words she so desperately wanted to say were caught in her throat. She couldn't speak, but her head began to move, a quick, frantic series of nods that spoke louder than any words. It was a silent, powerful yes. Over the next few weeks, Team 12 settled into the familiar, often tedious, rhythm of a Junin's life. Their days were a blur of drank missions, chasing lost cats, pulling weeds from a grumpy old woman's garden, and painting fences. These missions, though mundane, were a testament to their budding teamwork. Kagami's keen eyes and strategic mind, Yuki's quiet efficiency, and Naruto's leadership made even the most boring tasks feel organized and quick. They were a well-oiled machine, their movements synchronized and their communication a seamless, wordless flow. After their missions, their days ended in their secluded training ground near the Valley of the End. Under the quiet guidance of their genius teammate, they trained with a renewed purpose. Kagami, initially humbled by the reveal of Naruto's Sharingan, now trained with a fierce determination. She would spar with him, her Onetamo Sharingan struggling to keep up with the effortless precision of his. Naruto, in turn, would calmly point out her flaws, his voice never condescending, his movements a perfect, silent lecture. She was learning to rely on her own intuition and speed, not just her eyes. Yuki, too, blossomed under his care. Her ice release, once erratic and fueled by her anxiety, became a thing of quiet, devastating beauty. Naruto taught her to find a center of calm, to let the chakra flow like a gentle stream instead of a raging river. She would watch him, her timid and shy nature slowly giving way to a profound sense of trust. In the quiet moments after a long day of training, as they sat under the setting sun, she would find her eyes lingering on him, her heart skipping a beat as he'd turn to offer her a bottle of water. The feelings were slow, subtle, but as undeniable as the warmth of the sun on her face. As the weeks passed, Team 12 became a true unit. Their friendship, forged in loneliness and sealed in shared vulnerability, was a thing of silent strength. They were no longer just a group of 3 kids on a team. They were a quiet, powerful family. #hashtag Land of Waves #hashtag. The Hokage's office was a place of quiet authority, but today, it was filled with the low hum of anticipation. Minato sat at his desk, his expression a mix of paternal concern and official determination. Before him stood 2 teams that, despite their shared village, felt worlds apart. Team 11 stood with an almost palpable confidence. Minma and Mito, their faces a mirror of their father's own youthful cockiness, looked ready for a real challenge. Their teammate, Yakumo Kurama, held a quiet, watchful demeanor, her hands folded neatly at her sides. Kakashi, Their sensei stood beside them, his signature bored expression hiding a sharp, calculating mind. Opposite them stood Team 12. They were a study in silent competence. Naruto, Kagami, and Yuki were a quiet, cohesive unit, their movements subtle, their eyes constantly observing. Orochimaru stood behind them, a gentle, almost grandfatherly smile on his face that did little to hide the powerful chakra simmering just beneath the surface. "I have decided that you two teams will be collaborating on this mission," Minato announced, his voice carrying the weight of the Hokage. "This is not a simple escort. I foresee potential for conflict. This mission will test your ability to work with other shinobi, not just within your own team." Minma and Mito exchanged a cocky grin. "Leave it to us, Dad," Minma said, his voice full of bravado. "We'll show them how it's done." Team 12 remained silent. They knew better than to brag. The client an hour later, at the village gates, the two teams met their client, an old man with a straw hat and a half-empty bottle of sake clutched in his hand. "Humph," the man grunted, his eyes bloodshot and his words slurred. "Just a bunch of snot-nosed brats. The name's Tazuna. You're going to be escorting me to the land of waves. Don't cause me any trouble." Minma and Mito immediately began to complain, their voices loud and full of indignation. "A mission like this? This is an insult. We're Hokage's children, not bodyguards for some old drunk." Naruto simply watched, his face impassive. He glanced at his siblings and then at his teammates, a silent understanding passing between them. They knew this was more than a crank mission, and they knew they had to be the ones to handle the real threats. "You too," Naruto said, his voice a low, calm whisper that cut through the noise. "This isn't a show. It's a mission. The client's behavior is irrelevant. Our objective is to get him to his destination. Nothing more." The two teams, their dynamics already in full display, began their journey. Tazuna, still grumbling about the lack of respect, shuffled along, followed by the two teams. Minma and Mito walked ahead, their loud chatter a constant presence, while Team 12, as usual, walked in silence behind them. Naruto's eyes, a calm, unwavering blue, swept over the terrain. His gaze, however, lingered for a moment on a small puddle in the middle of the road. A puddle where there should have been none. There hasn't been any rain in days, and a puddle of that size would have long since dried. It was a simple observation, a flaw in a meticulously planned ambush. Without a word, without a change in his placid expression, Naruto reached for a kunai. With a flick of his wrist, he attached a small explosive tag to the handle. The movement was fluid, effortless, and entirely unnoticed by everyone but his own team. He threw the kunai, not at the puddle itself, but just above it. The small blade spun through the air, its trajectory perfect. The explosive tag detached and landed with a quiet splash. A second later, a brilliant flash of light and a thunderous bang ripped through the serene forest. The puddle exploded, sending up a cloud of water, dirt, and shredded flesh. Two figures were revealed, their linked chain-link weapon now severed by the blast. The Demon Brothers, caught completely off guard by the unexpected attack, were torn apart by the explosion. Their bodies hit the ground in a spray of blood and shredded cloth. A stunned silence fell over the group. Kakashi, whose Sharingan had been just a moment too slow, stared at the carnage, his eye wide with a mixture of shock and a chilling respect. Minma and Mito were frozen, their faces pale with a combination of fear and awe. "What was that?" Minma yelled, his voice cracking. Naruto, completely unfazed, simply walked to Tazuna. "The mission is no longer a crank," he said, his voice as calm as ever. "The client is a liar." The explosion and the subsequent silence had ripped the mask off the crank mission. The blood and torn clothing of the Demon Brothers were a grim reality, a far cry from chasing lost cats. Tazuna, the bridge builder, was now trembling, his face ashen with terror. You knew?" Tazuna stammered, staring at the shattered remains of the assassins. "How did you know?" Naruto simply looked at him, his face impassive. "A puddle when there shouldn't be one," he said, his voice flat. "It's an amateur mistake. But the fact that they were here means you lied about the mission." Tazuna, seeing no way out, sagged in defeat. He took a long, shaky breath and began to tell his story. He spoke of Gato, the ruthless shipping magnate who had taken over the land of waves. He told them of the poverty, the starvation, and the fear. The bridge he was building was their only hope for freedom, and Gato had hired Ninja to stop him. He had lied about the mission rank, hoping a crank escort would be enough protection. A new tension settled over the two teams. Minma and Mito looked at each other, their youthful pride replaced by a solemn, serious look. Kakashi Sensei, Minma said, his voice now devoid of its usual arrogance. We need to continue the mission. This isn't just a mission anymore. It's about saving a village. He's right, Mito added, her eyes filled with a new, fiery resolve. We can handle it. This is a real challenge, and we're not going to back down just because it got a little harder. Kakashi watched them, a flicker of pride in his visible eye. He then looked at Team 12. Naruto simply gave him a small, silent nod, a look that said they had already decided. Very well, Kakashi said, a hint of a smile on his face. The mission is a go, but be warned, from this moment on, we're in enemy territory. As they were about to reach land of waves, the air grew cold. A dense, unnatural mist began to roll in, swallowing the forest and blanketing the road in a thick, wet shroud. It was the kind of mist that stole the very sound from the air, a silent predator in itself. The Chunin felt a prickle of unease, their senses on high alert. This was no ordinary fog. Suddenly, a massive sword appeared from the mist, an unseen hand directing it with lethal precision. The broad blade, known as the Kubikurabocho, was aimed directly at Kakashi's neck. The attack was so fast and so silent that it was as if the sword itself had willed its way out of the void. This was no brute force. This was a master assassin. At the same time, another figure emerged from the mist. A shinobi with pale skin and a confident smirk, wielding the Hiramakiri, a wide, cleaver-like blade that seemed to hum with chakra. He didn't go for the genin or the client. He went for the sensei he knew was the true obstacle. So, you're the one they call the legendary Sannin, Mangetsu Hozuki said, his voice laced with a cold amusement. Let's see if you're as good with a blade as the rumors say. He lunged, a flurry of precise and elegant strikes, the Hiramakiri a blur of deadly motion. Kakashi's Sharingan flared to life, his eye widening as he dodged the massive blade by a hair's breadth. He saw the killer behind it, Zabuza Momochi, a legend cloaked in mist. He barely had time to react before he was forced onto the defensive. Meanwhile, Orochimaru met Mangetsu's attack with a chilling, fluid grace. He drew his own blade, the Kusanagi sword, and a symphony of clashing steel filled the mist. The two legends, a master of blades and a master of all jutsu, were now engaged in a match of pure, unadulterated kenjutsu. The genin were left alone, caught in the eye of a storm. Tazuna, terrified, cowered. Minma and Mito, shocked into a brief, terrified silence, finally snapped into action, moving to protect him. Naruto's team, however, didn't hesitate. They had been trained for this. In one fluid motion, they formed a triangle around the bridge builder, their eyes scanning the mist for any unseen threat. The true test of their teamwork had just begun. The mist swirled, a chilling shroud that obscured all but the immediate vicinity. Haku, a blur of motion, lunged directly at Tazuna. But a voice, cold and calm, cut through the air. A beautiful mask can hide a truly frightening darkness, Naruto said, his Sharingan flaring to life. Haku responded in kind, a flurry of ice-infused Senbon needles raining down on Naruto. The attack landed, hitting their mark with a dull thud. But Naruto's body didn't fall. Instead, it dissolved into a flock of crows that swirled and cawed, surrounding Haku. The crows weren't just a physical defense, they were an assault on the mind, attempting to lock Haku in a powerful genjutsu. Haku, however, was a master of evasion. He sensed the illusion, and with a burst of pure speed, he leaped away, leaving the crows to disperse harmlessly. He landed on a tree branch, and a dozen more Senbon flew from his hands, their glint a cold promise of death. But when they reached Naruto's last known location, he was gone. Behind you, was all Haku heard. He didn't even have time to turn his head as a powerful fist connected squarely with his jaw. The blow was not just a hit, but a physical demonstration of raw force. Haku was sent skidding back, crashing into the water with a heavy splash. At that exact moment, Orochimaru's fight with Mangetsu came to a grinding halt. Mangetsu, having seen Haku's quick defeat and having felt the sheer, insurmountable power of a Sannin, knew the battle was lost. He saw the cold, murderous intent in Orochimaru's eyes, and he knew there was no victory to be found. With a silent nod to Zabuza, he retreated into the mist, a master of the seven swords unwilling to die in a losing battle. Zabuza, seeing his primary target's bodyguard defeated and his backup fleeing, made the only logical choice. He used his mist body flicker to disappear without a trace, taking the defeated Haku with him. The mist dissipated, revealing a silent, exhausted battlefield. Kakashi stood there, his left arm hanging limp, a deep cut on his shoulder. He was panting heavily, his Sharingan still spinning with a tired, weary light. He was battered, but alive. Team 11 and 12, shaken and silent, looked at their wounded sensei. They had won, but they had also come to understand a harsh truth. Their journey had only just begun. The mist had finally cleared, leaving behind a cold, damp silence. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth and blood. Orochimaru walked out of the forest, his movements fluid and graceful, as if the grueling battle with Mangetsu had been nothing more than a light sparring session. A small, thin line of blood ran from the corner of his mouth, the only sign of the hard-fought match. His golden eyes, calm and calculating, surveyed the scene. He first went to Kakashi, whose exhausted frame was propped against a tree, his left arm hanging limp. "Are you all right, Kakashi?" Orochimaru asked, his voice a low hum. He inspected the deep cut on Kakashi's shoulder with a quiet, medical detachment. That was a serious wound. A formidable foe, indeed. Zabuza has a talent for the blade. Kakashi, still panting, simply nodded. He's good, but he's nothing compared to Mangetsu. Orochimaru gave a small, knowing smile. He then turned his attention to the rest of the genin, his gaze sweeping over each of them. "Are all of you unharmed?" he asked, his voice carrying an uncharacteristic note of concern. "Did anyone suffer any injuries? Do not lie. The sooner we treat them, the better." His eyes then landed on Naruto, who stood apart from the rest, his hands in his pockets. Orochimaru's face held a quiet, satisfied look. "Naruto-kun," he said. The rest of the teams looked on, a mix of awe and trepidation in their eyes. They had just seen a Sannin and a copy ninja battle with legends, but it was their quiet, mysterious teammate who held the true fascination of their sensei. Naruto's calm voice was the first to break the silence. "Haku is an ice release user," he said, as if commenting on the weather. "When they return, that will be a problem. We need to be prepared." Minma and Mito stared at him, their faces a mix of confusion and awe. The arrogance they had carried for so long was completely gone, replaced by a humbling silence. Minma was the first to speak. "How did you know?" he asked, his voice low. "How did you know to do that?" Naruto turned to him, his expression placid. Mito looked at him, her eyes wide. What was that jutsu? The one you used to disappear? I've never seen anything like it." Naruto's gaze was direct. "It's called a body flicker technique. It's just a movement jutsu." Their conversation was interrupted by another voice. Yakumo Kurama, her expression thoughtful, approached Yuki. "He's a strange one," Yakumo said, her voice a quiet murmur. "He's so calm. He fights without any emotion, like he's just solving a problem. Do you know why he's like that?" Yuki looked from Naruto to Yakumo, her heart a tangled mix of protectiveness and pride. She couldn't tell Yakumo the whole story, but she could offer a glimpse. "He's a lot like you and me, I think," Yuki said quietly. "He's just seen too many bad things to be angry about it anymore. He's learned to be strong on his own." Naruto turned his head toward the still shaken Tazuna. His expression was calm, his voice as steady as a stone in a stream. "Is your home close?" Naruto asked, his question a simple, pragmatic command. "Kakashi Sensei needs to rest." Tazuna's eyes, wide with a mixture of terror and disbelief, stared at the young boy. This was not a snot-nosed genin. This was a leader, a general in a child's body. He nodded frantically, his words catching in his throat. It's just past the forest," he stammered, pointing a trembling hand toward the path. "My village, it's just a few more hours from here." The others watched the interaction in stunned silence. Minma and Mito, so used to taking command, found themselves standing quietly, unable to question Naruto's quiet authority. Kakashi, propped up by Orochimaru, gave a small, weary smile. He saw the shift in his student's brother, the boy who had just gone from quiet genius to a natural leader. This was more than just a mission. It was a testament to the growth of a future legend. The remainder of the journey was silent, a long and somber march through the dense forest. The weight of the recent battle hung over them, a quiet testament to the true nature of their mission. As the light began to fade, they finally came to a small, humble home on the outskirts of a sleepy village. Naruto's calm voice was the only one that broke the quiet. "We're here, Tazuna-san." A woman in her late 20s, beautiful with a gentle, kind face, opened the door. Her eyes, filled with worry, immediately found her father, and with a gasp of relief, she rushed out to embrace him. "Father," she cried, her voice a mix of profound relief and concern. "Are you all right? I was so worried." Tazuna, exhausted but profoundly relieved, hugged her back. "I'm fine, my dear Tsunami. These fine shinobi, they saved my life." Tsunami looked at the group, her gaze settling on the wounded Kakashi and the weary Chunin. "Please," she said, her voice filled with gratitude, "come in. You must be exhausted. You are all welcome here." Inside the warmth of Tazuna's home, the air was heavy with unspoken words. While Orochimaru's hands glowed with the green of a medical jutsu, working on Kakashi's deep shoulder wound, the three Chunin sat in the living room. The small space, with its simple furniture and soft light, was a world away from the cold, violent mist. Minma and Mito, their usual boisterous energy replaced by a heavy silence, stared at the floor. The arrogance that had fueled them for so long had been shattered by a master of the blade, and by their brother's effortless defense. Finally, Minma took a deep, shaky breath and looked at Naruto. "Naruto," he began, his voice small and unfamiliar. I'm sorry. We were so wrong. We were so busy being proud of ourselves we didn't see you." Mito, her eyes shining with unshed tears, nodded. "You saved us," she whispered. "You were right the whole time. You're the one who knew what was happening, and you're the one who—" She trailed off, unable to find the words to describe what he had just done. Naruto listened, his expression placid. He did not look at them with anger or bitterness. He just looked tired. After a long moment, he finally spoke, his voice calm and even. "I just did what was necessary," he said simply. "It was the most efficient way to deal with the problem. You were caught off guard. You'll learn to be more observant. That's all." The words were not cruel, but they were not forgiving either. It was a simple, logical acknowledgement of the situation. Their apology was accepted, but the years of silent pain could not be erased in a single moment. It was a new beginning, not a clean slate. The air in the room was heavy with Orochimaru's chilling prediction. The Chunin, who had just survived their first true confrontation, now faced the daunting reality that a much harder battle was on the horizon. Naruto's calm voice cut through the silence. "They'll be back," he said, his eyes scanning the faces of the other Chunin. "And when they do, you need to be ready." He turned to his siblings, his gaze unwavering. "You can't face Haku," he stated simply, his words direct and without malice. He then looked at Yakumo, then at his own teammates, Kagami and Yuki. "You all need to train. The battle in the mist, that was just the beginning." Naruto's calm voice breaks the heavy silence. He turns to his siblings and Yakumo. Zabuza and Mangetsu didn't have the strength to finish off Kakashi Sensei or Orochimaru Sensei. That's why they separated them from us and gave Haku a chance to kill Tazuna. He looks at them, his eyes unwavering. "Next time, I'll be a target too." They saw that I was able to defend against Haku. This means they'll try to separate me from you. They'll know that if they can take me out, the rest of you will be easy. Naruto's words hang in the air, a cold, calculated truth. He looks at Kagami and Yuki. "This time, you'll be on your own. It's time for you to face a real threat. It's time for you to learn to rely on each other." His siblings and teammates are silent, absorbing the weight of his words. They've just been given their marching orders. The training has a new, life-or-death purpose. The mission has truly begun. Naruto looked at them, his eyes unwavering. He took a breath, the air in the room thick with tension, and laid out his plan in a calm, clear voice. "I have a plan, but you all need to listen carefully," he began, his voice commanding a silent respect they couldn't ignore. He pointed a finger at Yuki. "Yuki will stay here and protect Tsunami-san. Her ice release will be a formidable defense." Then, he gestured to Kagami and Yakumo. Kagami and Yakumo will protect Tsunasan. You both have a talent for observation that will be vital in defending him from any ambush. He then looked at the two most powerful figures in the room. I'll assist Kakashi Sensei against Zabuza, and Oro Kimura Sensei will fight Mangetsu. Finally, he turned to his siblings, his gaze intense. That leaves Minma and Mito to fight Haku. You two can use the Nine-Tails chakra to fight him. A stunned silence fell over the room. His plan was a masterpiece of strategy, a flawless and ruthless distribution of resources. It was a testament to his tactical genius, but it was also a heavy burden to place on his siblings. He was giving them a difficult, life-or-death mission, a true test of their abilities. The day was a frigid, misty canvas of white and gray. The air on the bridge was cold, and the wind, laced with the scent of salt and sea, whipped at their faces. Everyone was in position, their roles a silent, tactical prayer. Yuki, her face a mask of calm determination, remained behind at Tezuna's home, her ice release at the ready. Kagami and Yakumo stood on the bridge, a silent, watchful pair on either side of Tezuna. They were a unified force, their Sharingan active and ready for any threat. The fight began with a flash of steel. Mangetsu, wielding the Hiramakiri, was a fluid storm of water and steel as he clashed with Orochimaru. The two masters of Kenjutsu were a blur of motion, a symphony of deadly strikes that kept the Sannin completely occupied. Orochimaru's movements, graceful and lethal, were a perfect counter to Mangetsu's erratic, water-based style. On the other side of the bridge, Zabuza materialized from the mist, his Kubikirabocho humming with chakra. He was a force of nature, a killer whose speed and power were a terror to behold. But this time, he was not fighting alone Kakashi. Naruto was by the copy ninja's side, a silent, deadly partner. Naruto's Sharingan was a perfect complement to Kakashi's, their movements synchronized and their strategy flawless. Naruto used his jutsu to create openings, while Kakashi used his Sharingan to exploit them. They were an unstoppable team, pushing Zabuza back with every strike. The true battle, however, was happening in a silent, misty corner of the bridge. Haku, a blur of motion, appeared before Minma and Mito. His movements were too fast for them, his Sunban a relentless rain of death. They were on the defensive, their every move a desperate attempt to stay alive. They were outmatched, their skills and speed no match for the assassins. We can't hit him. Mito gasped, her voice filled with panic. Minma, his face pale, dodged a flurry of needles. What do we do? In that moment of desperation, as Haku moved in for the killing blow, a silent, chilling truth settled over them. They were on their own. They had to fight with everything they had. They had to use the power they had been told to keep hidden. Naruto said to use it. Minma yelled, and with a shared, desperate cry, they both tapped into the dormant power within them. A torrent of red, malevolent chakra erupted from their bodies, swirling around them like a demonic cloak. Their eyes turned a crimson red, and the air around them became thick and heavy. The ground began to crack, and the water around them churned. The power of the Nine-Tails was now theirs to wield, and their final battle had just begun. The red chakra surged around Minma and Mito, their eyes glowing a demonic crimson. The sheer force of the Nine-Tails was an overwhelming reality, a power they had only ever been told about. Their fear was gone, replaced by a primal fury. They moved with a speed and ferocity that shocked even Haku. He was a master of his craft, but he was still human. He dodged and weaved, but he could not escape the raw, explosive force of the chakra. With a final, desperate cry, the two of them landed a synchronized, powerful blow, sending Haku crashing into the ground, defeated. Meanwhile, a different kind of fight was unfolding between Naruto, Kakashi, and Zabuza. Naruto, his Sharingan spinning, was a whirlwind of calculated chaos. He used a powerful, advanced Jinjutsu, weaving illusions of his clones appearing from all directions. Zabuza, a master of battle, was a legend for a reason. He cut down every clone that came at him, but he was using precious energy. Naruto's plan, however, was in motion. Zabuza, his focus on the false targets, was unprepared for what came next. Naruto, a blur of motion, used the body flicker technique to get into position. Now Kakashi, Naruto yelled. Zabuza turned just in time to see Kakashi, his hand crackling with the blue-white energy of the Chidori. The attack was a perfect, precise strike aimed at Zabuza's heart. The blow was powerful, and Zabuza fell to his knees, defeated. The mist began to clear, revealing the aftermath of the battle. The air was silent, the roar of the chakra now a faint hum. Menma and Mito were panting, exhausted but victorious. Naruto stood beside Kakashi, his expression calm and composed, but his body was weary from the exertion. They had faced legends, and they had won. The air was still, the final echoes of the battle against the ninja assassins fading into a chilling silence. The shinobi stood on the bridge, battered and exhausted, their victory a hollow, fragile thing. Kakashi was on his knees, panting, and Menma and Mito's chakra cloaks were still faintly glowing. They had won, but they had paid a steep price. Just as the silence settled, a sound of heavy footsteps and loud, drunken laughter echoed from the shore. A short, corpulent man with a ridiculous, smug grin appeared, followed by 100 men armed with clubs, swords, and whatever else they could find. Gato had arrived, and he was ready to collect his prize. He looked at the weary shinobi, his eyes filled with a cruel, triumphant glee. "So, you defeated them, did you?" He cackled. "It doesn't matter. They were just the warm-up. Now that you're exhausted, you're mine. Kill them all, boys." The bandits, a loud, disorganized mob, began to cheer, their faces filled with a savage hunger. The shinobi, however, were terrified. They had no chakra left. They had no strength left. 100 untrained men were a more dangerous threat now than a master assassin. But Naruto's face remained calm. His eyes, though tired, were clear and calculating. He stepped forward, putting himself in front of the others, and looked at Gato with an unwavering stare. "You're making a mistake," Naruto said, his voice quiet but commanding. "Your plan is flawed." Gato laughed, a booming, arrogant sound. "Flawed? I have an army. You're nothing but a bunch of tired brats. I'm going to kill you all and finish what Zabuza couldn't." "You didn't hire an army to kill us," Naruto stated, his tone as cold and hard as steel. "You hired them because you're a coward who's afraid of dying alone. Now, you have 100 mouths to feed and no money to pay them. The moment you die, this army will have no one to pay them, and they'll scatter like roaches. And all of them know who is the cause of all their problems, you." A chilling quiet settled over the bridge. Gato's cocky grin vanished. He looked at his army, and for the first time, he saw 100 faces that were no longer obedient, but filled with a new, dangerous hunger. And for the first time, he saw not a group of children, but a genius who had just turned his own men against him. The air on the bridge was a live wire. Gato's face, once full of a triumphant glee, was now pale with a growing, profound terror as he watched his own men turn on him. But before the bandits could act on their newfound rage, a new presence emerged from the mist. It was Mangetsu Hozuki, his body showing a few minor cuts, his face a mask of cold, murderous fury. He had been defeated by a Sannin, but now he was faced with a mob who had betrayed him and a cowardly man who had hired him for a suicide mission. "You hired a ninja." Mangetsu's voice was a low, chilling whisper that cut through the silence. "But you didn't think a ninja would have a code of honor. You betrayed us. You sent me and Zabuzasan to our deaths. Now, you will learn the cost of your arrogance." Mangetsu raised the Hiramakiri, its twin blades humming with a dark, vengeful chakra. He didn't waste time with words. He was a force of pure, silent devastation. He moved through the crowd of bandits with a fluid, terrifying grace, his blades a blur of motion. The untrained men, armed with nothing but crude weapons and drunken courage, were no match for a master of the 7 swords. The massacre was swift and brutal, a grim and chilling lesson in the difference between a shinobi and a common thug. Finally, Mangetsu stood before Gato, his eyes filled with a terrifying, cold fury. Gato, paralyzed with fear, could only scream as Mangetsu's blade came down, ending the war for the land of waves once and for all. Mangetsu Hozuki stood over the bloody remains of Gato, the Hiramakiri held at his side. He had a moment of silent contemplation, then he moved. He ignored the cowering villagers and the stunned Konoha shinobi, his only focus now on a matter of honor. He walked to where Zabuza and Haku had fallen, and with a quiet, solemn grace, he gathered their bodies. He would not leave his fellow swordsmen to be desecrated. He would not leave them to rot in a foreign land. With a final, silent nod to the exhausted group on the bridge, he turned and disappeared into the mist, a shadow, leaving with a heavy, final cargo. The silence that followed was a profound and absolute thing. The mist began to clear, revealing a blood-soaked bridge and the silent, stunned faces of the villagers. The shinobi stood, their bodies weary, their hearts heavy. They had won. The bridge was now free. But they had learned that victory in the shinobi world was a messy, brutal, and often lonely thing. After a day of much-needed rest, the two teams, weary but triumphant, began their journey back to Konoha. The mood on the road was quiet, a stark contrast to the initial, boisterous trip. There was a newfound respect and a shared understanding among them, a bond forged in the crucible of a life-or-death mission. Upon their arrival, they were immediately summoned to the Hokage's office. Minato sat at his desk, his face a mask of worry and concern, with Kushina standing anxiously beside him. Kakashi and Orochimaru stood before them, their postures professional and their expressions somber. It was Kakashi who spoke first, giving a detailed, methodical report of the mission. He didn't hide anything. The initial ambush, his being outmatched by Zabuza, and the shocking revelation of the mission's true rank. The mission was far more than a crank, Kakashi explained, his single eye unwavering. It was a high A rank. Zabuza Momochi and another swordsman, Mangetsu Hozuki, were our opponents. He then had to report on the actions of the genin. He spoke of Menma and Mito's courage, their use of the Nine-Tails chakra to overcome Haku, and of Naruto's swift and brutal efficiency against the first assassins. Naruto was able to detect the ambush immediately and ended it before it began. Orochimaru stepped forward, his words more of a philosophical analysis than a report. The genin performed remarkably, he said, his voice a low hum of satisfaction. They did not just complete the mission, they mastered it. They learned to rely on their own skills and each other, not just on us. They have grown beyond what we could teach them. Naruto, in particular, displayed an unparalleled strategic mind. He saw every threat and every opportunity. He is a natural leader. Minato and Kushina listened in stunned silence. Their two children had used the Nine-Tails power, a terrifying thought in itself. But it was Naruto's name, mentioned with such profound respect, that truly shocked them. He wasn't just a genin on the team. He was its quiet, brilliant leader. He had faced down danger and emerged with a new, terrifying strength. A tense silence filled the Hokage's office after the full report was given. Minato's mind was a whirlwind of concern, but also a growing sense of pride. He looked at the two sensei, who stood before him, awaiting his decision. It was Orochimaru who broke the silence, his voice a low, confident hum. Minato-san, I would like to formally recommend Team 12 for the Chunin exams. The statement, so bold and unexpected, caused Minato to look up sharply. Orochimaru continued, his golden eyes unwavering. Their performance in the Land of Waves proved they are ready. They are no longer genin. They have the skills, the tactical minds, and the teamwork of Chunin, if not better. It is the next logical step in their development. Kakashi, after a beat of his own silence, nodded in agreement. I concur with Orochimaru Sensei's assessment. I would also like to formally recommend Team 11 for the exams. They faced a trial they were not prepared for, and it has humbled them. It was a baptism by fire that has forged them into a true team. They have earned the right to test their skills and grow. Minato looked from Kakashi's confident face to Orochimaru's calm, serene expression. He could see in their eyes that this was not a whim. This was a calculated, deliberate decision based on the immense growth they had witnessed. Very well, Minato said, his voice carrying the weight of his office and his fatherly concern. The request is accepted. The teams will be entered into the Chunin exams. A collective gasp of both shock and pride escaped from Kushina. She was thrilled for her children, but also terrified for all of them. The road ahead was about to get a lot more dangerous, and there was no turning back. Later that day at family dinner, the dinner table was a familiar scene of warmth and life. Steam rose from a large bowl of ramen, and the usual chatter filled the air. Menma and Mito were telling a loud, proud story about their use of the Nine-Tails chakra, their voices filled with a new, sobered reverence for the power. Minato listened with a quiet, paternal pride. But Kushina's eyes were not on them. Her gaze was fixed on Naruto, who sat on the other side of the table, eating his ramen with a calm, methodical grace. He didn't interrupt, didn't boast. He just ate, his presence a quiet, placid island in the sea of family chaos. She wanted to ask. More than anything, she wanted to look at him and ask, what was it like? Facing Zabuza? Did you feel fear? Did it hurt? She wanted to be the mother she should have been, to offer him a gentle hand and a comforting word. But the words wouldn't come. She saw the quiet strength in his eyes, the subtle scars of a life lived in the shadows. He didn't look like a boy who needed a mother's comfort. He looked like a veteran who had fought a war alone. Her throat went dry, the question a heavy lump that she couldn't swallow. She had spent a decade seeing a son who wasn't there, and now that he was, she had no idea how to talk to him. The years of neglect had built a wall between them, and in that moment, she was terrified of what would happen if she tried to tear it down. Is something wrong? Naruto asked, his voice soft, the question simple and without judgment. Kushina's composure shattered completely. She looked at him, at the quiet boy who had just asked a question filled with a simple, genuine concern. The tears she had been holding back for years now flowed freely, a silent torrent of pain and regret. She couldn't speak, her throat choked with a guilt so profound it felt like a physical weight. I should have been there, she choked out, her voice a broken whisper. I should have seen you. I was so busy, so worried about them, that I didn't see you. I'm so sorry, Naruto. I'm so sorry. Her face was a mask of raw anguish, a mother finally confronting the son she had failed. In that moment, she wasn't a powerful kunoichi, a legend of the leaf. She was just a woman, heartbroken by her own past. Kushina's words hung in the air, her face a mask of raw regret. The other family members were frozen, watching the deeply personal and painful exchange. Naruto looked at his mother, his eyes clear and without malice. He didn't move, didn't offer a hug or a word of comfort. His voice, when he finally spoke, was calm, even. It doesn't matter now, Naruto said, his words a cold, factual statement that cut deeper than any angry outburst. I've grown up. His simple words were a final, chilling truth. They told her that her tears and her apologies were too little, too late. The boy she had failed was gone, replaced by a man who had faced the world on his own and no longer needed her. Naruto, his eyes a calm, steady blue, looked at Kushina, then at his siblings and Minato. He was not being cruel. He was simply stating a truth. You don't have to worry about me, he said, his voice flat and without emotion. I have tricks even beyond the Sharingan. He then looked at all of them, a silent promise in his gaze. I'll show you in the Chunin exams. Hashtag next day hashtag. The silence in the Hokage's office was heavy. Minato sat at his desk, the mission report from Kakashi and Orochimaru open before him. But his mind wasn't on the words on the page. His mind was on his son Naruto. He had heard the reports, seen the proof of his children's growth. He had felt the power of the Nine-Tails chakra from a distance. But it was Naruto's final statement that echoed in his mind. You don't have to worry about me. I have tricks even beyond the Sharingan. The words were not an empty boast. They were a cold, factual statement from a boy who had proven his skills time and time again. Minato was a genius in his own right, and he knew a true prodigy when he saw one. Naruto's mind, his strategic brilliance, and his quiet confidence were not things that could be taught in a few months. They were a product of a life of struggle, of a hard-won maturity that Minato realized, with a heavy heart, he had been too late to see. He looked at the report again, his eyes lingering on the words describing Naruto's mastery of the body flicker technique and his seemingly effortless control over Genjutsu. Naruto was no longer a ghost to be pitied. He was a force to be reckoned with. And Minato, the fourth Hokage, a master of strategy and speed, felt a surge of professional curiosity that bled into a personal, desperate need to know more. He needed to understand this powerful stranger who was his son. His interest was no longer passive. It was a mission. Meanwhile, with Naruto, a quiet moment, the wind on the hill behind the Hokage monument was cold, but the sight of the village bathed in the soft, evening light was a beautiful one. Naruto and Yuki sat together in comfortable silence, their presence a quiet, easy rhythm that needed no words. Yuki was the first to speak, her voice a soft murmur against the wind. The mission, it was so different. So many feelings. Naruto's gaze was fixed on the village below. It was what we were trained for, he replied, his voice calm and even. But you were different, she said, her voice filled with a quiet awe. You were so calm, so sure of yourself. You weren't afraid. Naruto's lips twitched into a small, almost imperceptible smile. There's no point in being afraid, he said simply. Fear is a distraction. And in a fight, distractions get you killed. Yuki nodded, a familiar blush creeping onto her cheeks. She was so used to his calm, logical way of thinking. She had seen him in his most terrifying and powerful moments. But in a strange way, she felt closer to him now than ever before. He was no longer a ghost to be feared, but a person she could talk to, a friend she could trust. Then, with a gentle, sudden movement, Naruto pulled her into a hug. The action was so unexpected that Yuki froze for a moment before melting into his arms. We've been so busy with the mission, Naruto admitted honestly, his voice a low hum against her hair, that we forgot to spend time together. Yuki's blush deepened, a warm flush spreading across her cheeks. She didn't say anything, but she didn't need to. With a quiet sigh of pure contentment, she nuzzled closer into Naruto's chest, her body relaxing completely into his embrace. The cold wind on the hill faded away, replaced by the warmth of their quiet, shared moment.